Let us pray. Lord, have mercy upon us. Christ, have mercy upon us. Lord, have mercy upon us. Our Father, which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, in earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive them that trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. Almighty God, who in thy wisdom and goodness hast appointed the office of rulers and parliaments for the welfare of society, the just government of men, we beseech thee to behold with thy abundant favor us thy servants, who now hast been pleased to call to the performance of importance thrust in these islands. Let thy blessing descend upon us here assembled, and grant that we may treat and consider all matters that shall come under our deliberation in so just and faithful a manner as to promote thy honor and glory, and to advance the peace, prosperity, and welfare of these islands, and of those whose interest thou hast committed to our charge. And this we beg for Jesus Christ our sake. Amen. The grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, and the love of God, and the fellowship of the Holy Spirit be with us all evermore. Amen.
Thank you, Mr. Neal. Members, the minutes from July 17, 2020 have been circulated. Are there any omissions, corrections, amendments to be made? There are none. The minutes are confirmed. The minutes are confirmed as printed. Thank you. There are no messages from the governor. You'll note under the announcements by the speaker, there was going to be an announcement on the ruling. From each one, we found out we need to make an amendment to that. And so I'll do that later, with your indulgence. There are no messages from the Senate, papers, and other communications. We have 3 papers this morning. First is in the name of the Premier. Premier, would you like to put your statement?
Good morning, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I have the honor to attach and submit for the consideration of the Honorable House of Assembly the Tourism Investment Rosewood Bermuda Order 2020 as made by the Minister responsible for tourism under Section 3(1)A of the Tourism Investment Act 2017, together with the written agreement of the Minister of Finance in exercise of the power conferred by Section 5 of the Tourism Investment Act 2017.
Thank you. Thank you, Premier. Minister Education, would you like to do your paper? Minister Education? Is Minister Birch available to do his that?
I am, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Birch, please proceed with yours. Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Speaker. I have the honor to attach and submit for the information of the Honorable House of Assembly. Very good. The Ottawa Simmons Arbitration Center plans.
Thank you, Minister. Is Minister Education available now? Minister?
Mr. Speaker, I understand that a few persons are having trouble with the link, but I'm happy to lay the statement forward if you don't mind, Mr. Speaker.
I don't mind at all. Go right ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On behalf of the Minister of Education, I have the honor to attach and submit for the information of this Honorable House the Bermuda College Audited Financial Statements 2019 laid in accordance with Bermuda College Act.
Thank you. Move on. Petitions, there are none. Statements by ministers and junior ministers. We have quite a few this morning. There are roughly 13 statements this morning. And first is the name of the Premier. Premier, would you like to present your statement?
Mr. Speaker, you've got two sign-ons, and so there's an echo when you speak and turn off one.
Thank you. Yeah, it was the other camera that we used for the sergeant of arms coming in, so we just corrected that. Thank you, Minister. Okay. All right. Premier, would you like to do your statement?
Oh, sorry, my mic was on mute, Mr. Speaker. That's not very helpful. Mr. Speaker, Bermuda's fortunes are dependent on the ability of the community to unite in two main efforts: the renewal of this existing economy and the design of a new paradigm of economic activity that strikes out from our traditions, creating an equitable redistribution of opportunity and wealth. Mr. Speaker, the concept of twin pillars of Bermuda's economy has become less a reality as our tax base, policy and legislative impetus, and third sector dependence have predominantly rested on international business. As a sector, they have shouldered this burden well, and Bermuda enjoys its continued high standard of living, largely due to the economic contribution generated at varying levels by international business. Tourism, Mr. Speaker, has become a mind-boggling formula of high costs, irrelevance in key markets, stops and starts in development, and an atrophy of outlook that prevents us from exploiting those things we do well. To be clear, Mr. Speaker, this does not all rest at the feet of the Bermuda Tourism Authority. I believe they have performed according to their existing capacity. Earlier this year, the Bermuda Tourism Authority noted that 2019 was the second best year in the past 13 years for leisure air arrivals, and stated that between 2015 and 2019, leisure air arrivals jumped 37%. 2019 was cited as the third consecutive year of record-breaking total visitor arrivals, a number that combines cruise, air, and yacht travelers. Mr. Speaker, those numbers were achieved against the backdrop of decreased air capacity and increased cruise arrivals. I do not propose to relitigate those numbers today. Suffice it to say, they tell a deeper story and in fact dictate much of the task that lies ahead. Mr. Speaker, it is my considered view that the Bermuda Tourism Authority as an organization is top-heavy and does not yet embrace the ethos of this government. That is to say, the creation of an equitable redistribution of opportunity so that those who have been left out or left behind by Bermuda's success, predominantly Black entrepreneurs, will receive a chance to participate on equal terms. Mr. Speaker, we must change the conversation around tourism. Bermuda is no longer the debutante at her first ball, and so the days of getting by on natural beauty alone are over. To extend the metaphor even more, Mr. Speaker, our dance card will never be filled if we don't make ourselves more attractive and more relevant. The proof of how harsh reality can be, especially when we try to ignore it, is seen in the numbers to which I referred a moment ago. Most honorable members older than me, but even I remember the mantra of Bermuda's glory days of tourism was to frown on cruise ships and their passengers, hamburger tourists, as one minister called them. Well, Mr. Speaker, having been so discerning in our past, it is fully evident of our declining relevance that our 2018 and 2019 numbers of total visitors comprise of approximately 65% of cruise visitors. As a minister responsible for tourism, I am determined that we will not be caught out by trends and changes in the market. Let me be clear, Mr. Speaker. I do not wish to run the Bermuda Tourism Authority, and I have no intention of being a micromanaging minister consumed with the operations of that organization. However, My responsibility is to set policy and to oversee its execution to the benefit of people of Bermuda, and that is what I intend to do. Mr. Speaker, a regrettable feature of life in Bermuda is the need for third-party validation of things which, even though they are clear as day, especially when stated by a member of this government. Therefore, lest honorable members consider that the comments that I make today are some nuanced spin or the work of high-priced consultants, in June 2011, almost a decade ago, John Crellin, the former general manager of the Fairmont Hamilton Princess, told the Royal Gazette this as he ended his tenure. And I quote, "Why do we always hear about Bermuda's heyday? It's been gone and things have moved on. That was about 25 or 30 years ago. This is now, and things are different, very different. Back then, we weren't surrounded by big-name resorts. We didn't have any competition. We really need to put things back into context rather than dwelling on the past. We need to do our research to see who our competition really is. It doesn't matter what we think, it's what tourists think. Something needs to change to take Bermuda to the next level. We need to be put back on the map. Bermuda needs to do something sooner rather than later." Mr. Speaker, that later is upon us. Mr. Speaker, there are a number of key issues that must be tackled, and I'm pleased to set those out in summary for the benefit of honorable members. The first is relevance. Mr. Speaker, honorable members will recall the National Tourism Plan launched under the auspices of the former Minister of Tourism and Economic Development, the honorable member for Constituency 33, Jamal Simmons. That plan features a section titled Awareness and Relevance, and it says, "We must focus our resources to make the right decisions, to make the right audiences more familiar with Bermuda and break through the noise of other destinations," end quote. And later in that section, it goes on to say, "If there are no distinguishing factors differentiating Bermuda, few people will choose her, and those that consider coming will view Bermuda as being very expensive," end quote. In these statements, Mr. Speaker, we find the defining issue behind our tourism challenge over the last 2 decades. Mr. Speaker, the fact that this is a national tourism plan means that the BTA is fully cognizant of this challenge, and that is a good thing. Beyond recognizing the issue, the BTA must cease looking inward in a very micro sense and advance a policy of engagement at the macro level that makes Bermuda an almost mandatory experience in our key markets. Mr. Speaker, to address the issue of inconsistent air arrivals, seasonality, and our high price point, we must connect to our key markets beyond the level of a vacation destination. We have fine events in Bermuda, but nothing that ranks as a must attend for the demographic we claim to want as our guests. As an example, Mr. Speaker, people will not leave New York for restaurant weeks in Bermuda. We must offer something more compelling that differentiates us and makes our island relevant. Number 2, air service development. Mr. Speaker, with my colleague, the honorable member for constituency number 26, the Minister of Transport, Neville Tyrrell, I intend to commit significant resources to further the development of air service for Bermuda. I have received a detailed analysis done during the tenure of the former Minister of Tourism and Transport, the honorable member for constituency 29, Zane De Silva, and I can advise honorable members of this honorable chamber that there is now a joined-up approach to air service development that will form the foundation of critical next steps in growing airlift from key markets to Bermuda. Number 3, film, arts, fashion, and entertainment. Mr. Speaker, Bermuda continues to have a reputation as staid, boring, and uninspiring. This issue is more than any real or perceived lack of nightlife or options after 10 p.m. There is a deeper core to this product discussion that must be addressed. Mr. Speaker, even the very best marketing will struggle in the long term to overcome the competitive headwinds that we face. This increased competition, paired with our high price point, means that we must evolve beyond the singular narrative of the idyllic island paradise. Mr. Speaker, we have spent hundreds of millions on marketing, staffed foreign offices, and are home to some of the world's top insurers, reinsurers, and global brands like Bacardi. How then can we be so unknown and essentially irrelevant to the very market from which those successes emanate? Striking out into film, art, fashion, and entertainment in targeted, meaningful ways that mirror the expectations created by our price point must be the next wave of effort in promoting Bermuda. Every day, we are treated to a success story in the local news of Bermudians who have achieved name recognition and success in these areas outside of Bermuda, but have no real, and I say real, home film festival, no real haven for the arts, no fully supported fashion week to match their talents. Mr. Speaker, people want to feel a buzz where they live and a sense that things are happening. Bermudians need to feel pride in their tourism and will do so when we provide them a product to brag about again. Mr. Speaker, natural beauty is not enough to get us by in 2020. Mr. Speaker, I will share with honorable members a useful illustration. A renowned European film festival has a $20 million budget, 10 to 12 million which comes from the country's government. This annual event connects this European city to Hollywood and is a must-attend event for all and sundry connected to the industry and has provided the city with a thriving art scene of which this event is the pinnacle. Yes, Mr. Speaker, $10 million is a significant spend on one event, and I'm not proposing we do so. But when we consider that Bermuda has been spending that annually on billboards, pink taxis, and TV ads with little to no return on goals first set out almost 20 years ago, investments into arts, fashion, and entertainment combined with celebrity to raise Bermuda's relevance must be seen as a long-term investment worth making. Mr. Speaker, we've tried fishing where the fish are. They aren't biting because they don't like our bait. It's time to make real investments to fix our product and recognize that just like we cannot take pink sand from the beach, selling pink sand will not get us where we need to be. Our approach must be different, leveraging celebrity to attract private sector sponsors to share the investment and assist in building their brand while we make our brand more relevant in key markets. Mr. Speaker, there is one trite aspect of tourism policy that applies from Hamilton, New Zealand to Hamilton, Bermuda. Tourism works best for all of us when air arrivals are up and hotels are full. I am determined to build on the work done by the ministers of this government to see more Bermudians working in tourism, earning salaries that allow them to meet their families' needs and establish themselves as citizens in their country whose careers and contributions drive this economy too. Speaker, in regards to economic development, it seems an eternity ago, but in his statement in support of the estimates of revenue and expenditure, the honorable member, the Minister of Finance, relied upon the words of an African proverb, and I quote, "If you wish to move mountains tomorrow, you must start by lifting stones today," end quote. Mr. Speaker, I am pleased to advise this honorable House that the efforts of this government in economic development continue to build that foundation for transformational change we promise for Bermuda. It is essential that Bermuda's economy builds on what we have while laying the legislative underpinning to advance the growth of existing and new sectors in our economy. It is often forgotten that our job in this honorable House, when it comes to economic development, is to create the legislative underpinning that our vibrant private sector can market internationally to attract business to Bermuda. It is what worked in financial services, and it is what will work in other sectors targeted for growth. Honorable members will have noted recent policy changes that promote the development of Bermuda's economy. This can be seen through the swift changes to the residential certificate policy outlined by my colleague, the member for constituency number 17, the Minister of Labor, Jason Hayward. Additionally, Mr. Speaker, I wish to advise honorable members of the following items under economic development. Honorable members will take under consideration today amendments to Bermuda's trust legislation, which will dramatically increase Bermuda's marketability by modernizing statutes. Led by the Bermuda Business Development Agency, marketing efforts, policy, and legislative changes are being advanced as part of a targeted Asia and Hong Kong strategy. The Cabinet Office, in conjunction with the Ministry of Finance, Bermuda Business Development Agency, and the Bermuda Monetary Authority, is crafting standalone family office legislation to differentiate Bermuda's offering in this competitive global space. To support the Ministry of Finance and the Registrar of Companies, the Bermuda Business Development Agency is setting out a clear strategy around marketing our economic substance regime that will see these changes for companies accrue to the benefit of Bermuda in the form of more jobs. Our fintech strategy continues to yield new company formations, with more companies applying to be licensed under Bermuda's framework. The Business Development Agency, in conjunction with Bermuda Monetary Authority, will be advancing changes to the digital asset framework for this Honorable House's consideration in September. The regulatory authority is advancing the necessary fee structure that will allow us to bring into force the legislation to promote subsea cables for Bermuda. And finally, Mr. Speaker, the Bermuda Economic Development Corporation is finalizing guidelines for approved residential schemes in the economic empowerment zones to attract Bermuda-based investment, creating construction jobs while maintaining the rich cultural history of these areas. In closing, Mr. Speaker, I believe it is important to underline a key difference in policy between this government and members opposite. The almost throwaway line of the opposition is the need for, and I quote, more foreign investment. But, Mr. Speaker, foreign investment, which does not see the profits benefit the people or the community in which it is invested, is yesterday's model. The economy of today and the future will not be the one with which the members opposite are so familiar and so comfortable. The economy we are determined to build is one that creates a country of Bermudian owners and Bermudian investors, ordinary women and men who can put their disposable income or hard-earned savings to work, investing in projects and initiatives that benefit the community and generate a return for them as investors and intergenerational wealth for their children. Mr. Speaker, time after time we hear the call for more foreign investment, but the unspoken part of that call is that it signals no change to the status quo or ranking of Bermudians in their own country. The members opposite specialize in short-term outbursts of economic activity that generate enough for today, but no long-term hope for tomorrow. Lurching from a boat race to billionaires to building a vanity airport terminal is not an economic record of which to be proud. Neither provided the lasting impact Bermudians need to transform their personal economic fortunes, and both left us with debts for many years to come. There is a shocking irony in the criticism from the government, because we are not following their model of crafting schemes to make the rich richer while denying Bermudians the wealth creation opportunity these investments should bring. Mr. Speaker, this government's economic paradigm will welcome foreign investment, but it must be paired and matched with Bermudian investment so that our children do not see profits sucked from their shores and wonder why their forefathers sold them out. Mr. Speaker, we are designing a new paradigm of economic activity that strikes out from our traditions, creating an equitable redistribution of opportunity and ensuring that Bermudians have an opportunity to participate so they can be owners in their own future generations to inherit. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Premier. Next statement this morning is in the name of the Deputy Premier. Deputy Premier, would you like to put your statement?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, thank you very much.
Go right ahead.
And good morning to you and the people of Bermuda. Mr. Speaker, I wish to inform honorable members of the steps being taken to bring to this honorable House legislation to implement measures to protect customers from the challenges arising in mortgage and lending transactions. Mr. Speaker, because of the economic impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, many persons are unemployed or underemployed and struggling to make ends meet. Many of these persons are homeowners with significant mortgages or loans. I am making this statement at this time to assure the public that help is on the way. Mr. Speaker, you may be surprised to learn that our Consumer Protection Act 1999 explicitly excludes from the definition of goods, in quotes, financial transactions with lenders. There is also no regulated code of conduct that governs the conduct of lending agencies and lending officers. Hence, consumers and small businesses currently have little or no redress for unfair or inequitable conduct by lending agencies. Mr. Speaker, some of the practices that have come to our attention include the following. A lender forecloses on a property and sells the home. The customer's property was sold at a fair market value, and the net sales proceeds, when applied to the principal balance, left a shortfall of $100,000. The customer has been paying off the shortfall for approximately 6 years. As a result, the former owner ends up with no asset and still paying a debt that they can ill afford to pay. In a number of other jurisdictions, this practice has been discontinued as banks have insurance to underwrite the writing off of bad debts. Next scenario. A customer has a 30-year mortgage term and has made 180 payments on a regular and timely basis and is now in default. It should be noted that these payments have contributed a significant amount of interest to the lender. The lender has the option to restructure the debt to have the effect of a lower mortgage payment and making the mortgage more affordable. Alternatively, the lender could allow the property to be rented and set the interest rate very low, which can be changed to a higher rate when the customer's financial position improves. None of these remedies were considered, and the customer was threatened with foreclosure. Next scenario. A customer was finding it difficult to find a job. Her tenant had moved out of the property. She was extremely frustrated and fearful of the mortgage going into arrears. She insisted that the lender take the keys to the property. The lender instructed the customer to take the keys to their attorney. The lender's attorney rented the property, and there was no communication between the lender and the mortgagor, although the customer is still the owner. It should be emphasized that lenders are not in the business of owning real estate and therefore should not accept keys from a mortgagor whose account was not in arrears. Next scenario, Mr. Speaker. A lender has written to a customer requesting that the customer reduce the mortgage principal balance by more than $60,000 in order to bring the loan to value, LTV, to an acceptable lender loan value. In other words, the value of the home is less than the outstanding loan amount. The collateral value has been reduced as a result of the economic downturn brought about by the 2008 recession. The customer, who has been current on all of her payments, sought independent advice. It was determined that based on the current payment, her LTV would be at an acceptable level within 6 months. Had she not sought the advice, she would have had to find $60,000 to pay the lender, which would have put her even deeper in debt. Instead, the mortgage has now been restructured. Last scenario, Mr. Speaker. There have been a number of complaints over the years of conflicts of interest. One example that was communicated to me was about an owner who was in arrears and trying to find a way to save his house from foreclosure. He submitted a long-term rental agreement where the rents would pay his monthly mortgage payment. The agreement was refused by the lender, and the property was foreclosed. It was discovered later that the property was purchased by a senior member of the lending institution. Mr. Speaker, you'll forgive me, because when these scenarios were presented to me, I really got very upset and angry when these scenarios were presented. So excuse my thrust and emotion in my voice. Okay, I'll continue, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, these are just a few of the many complaints we have received. These scenarios are made all worse because of the imbalance between the lending agencies and the individual customer. Agencies such as banks have a great deal of legal and financial clout, as opposed to individuals and owners of small businesses. Most customers do not read and understand the entire contract, nor do they understand the terms. Often they are not informed that there are alternative solutions to address their financial challenges. This problem affects persons at all educational and financial levels. Mr. Speaker, you would agree that an individual who is already struggling cannot afford the services of a lawyer or advisor. Many lawyers are themselves conflicted, as they are either customers of or have represented the lender. There are also too few lawyers that specialize in real estate and mortgage law. Mr. Speaker, as a government, we have committed to ensuring protections are in place to safeguard consumers from financial harm due to a disproportion of influence. We are currently working on policies and tabling legislation to achieve those ends. We expect that the proposed legislation will be tabled in the next session of the House. Some of the protections that we will be introducing are, but not limited to, the following: amending the Consumer Protection Act 1999. 1, to give the minister responsible for consumer affairs the authority to create regulations relating to consumer protections for mortgages and loans. 2, establishing a tribunal to consider complaints by consumers and arbitrate disagreements. 3, introduce penalties for non-compliance with the regulation. 4, providing communication and education on lending. Introducing a code of conduct that will govern the conduct of all lending officers and agencies. This will include outlining best practices in lending, defining unfair customer treatment and or unfair lending practices, and introducing remedies for addressing such instances. Defining rules governing foreclosures, including the disposition of property and any shortfall. Requiring lending agencies to introduce, quote, truth in lending practices. This means that the customer will have the right to detailed and clear disclosure of the following: the loan amount and payments, prepayment penalties, due dates and late charges, upfront fees, variable and fixed rates, payment default, and foreclosures. Mr. Speaker, we have all become acutely aware of the different ways in which vulnerability can manifest itself, especially in times of uncertainty. A home is often a Bermudian family's most valuable possession. Therefore, keeping families in their homes, preserving communities, and maintaining the family unit is a priority. Through these amendments, we will be putting Bermuda on par with many other jurisdictions. And most importantly, we are putting Bermudian families first. Lending practices that intimidate and cause fear in those who aspire to a peaceful, healthy financial future must end. Mr. Speaker, this government is committed to leveling the playing field and providing oversight, accountability to ensure protections are in place to safeguard consumers from financial harm. I must remind honorable members that this government has already completed the first phase of consumer financial protection through the implementation of the Debt Collection Act 2018. This initiative represents phase 2 of our financial protection initiative. Mr. Speaker, at this juncture, I would like to acknowledge the excellent work that is being produced by Executive Officer, Consumer Affairs, Karen Marshall, and our consultant, Ms. Frederica Forth. Ms. Forth has had 35 years of experience in lending. First, in the mortgage department of Bank of Bermuda, where she held a position of Vice President of Mortgage and Personal Lending Department, and subsequently with HSBC as Senior Service and Sales Manager, where she remained until early retirement in 2008. Since 2008, she has been in the real estate industry. In addition to offering real estate training and mortgage consultation, honorable members would agree that Ms. Forth has the right experience to assist with this initiative. She is also passionate about identifying protections for consumers in the area of lending. Ms. Marshall and Ms. Forth have almost completed their recommendations on the proposed amendments to legislation, policies and procedures to implement the required protection. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. The next statement this morning is in the name of the Minister of Finance. Minister?
Good morning, Mr. Speaker.
Good morning.
Mr. Speaker, I rise this morning to provide this Honourable House with an update on the Caroline Bay development and to provide the House with an interim report describing how we see the development progressing. In doing so, I will provide greater context into how we have viewed the project, the time we were made aware it was in financial distress, steps that are being taken currently, and the way forward on the project. Speaker, there are some aspects of the Bermuda government's plan that, on the advice of our lawyers, will not be discussed at this time. Honorable members of this House will be aware there were matters of sub judice, meaning they are in the hands of the court. It would be inappropriate to comment prematurely. Where it is possible for me to share greater detail with this Honorable House and the people of Bermuda now, I'm happy to do so. Speaker, the sad history of the project is well known, and I've written in detail previously about how, beginning in June 2019, both the Tranche B and C lenders formally notified the developers and the government of their demands to be repaid immediately due to the events of default having occurred. Consequently, and contrary to comments made by the developers in the media, the government legally had to meet its obligations under the loan and guarantee agreements. Specifically, the demand under the Tranche B agreements were received on the 19th of August 2019 and required payment within 45 days by the 3rd of October 2019. Mr. Speaker, the government acted quickly to first secure sufficient liquidity to meet its immediate obligations and provide contingency while it examined any other exposure. On the 17th of September 2019, we closed on a $200 million credit facility with local financial institutions. Following that, we exercised our option as guarantors under the Tranche B loan agreements to purchase rather than pay off the loan. This preserved all the rights that the debt holders had for the government to use in due course. The purchase price on exercise of this option was clearly defined in the loan agreement. This included the $85 million principal, accrued and unpaid interest, and legal expenses of the Tranche B lender for the transaction. Additionally, it required a 4% prepayment premium of $3.4 million. Again, contrary to a statement made that the government unnecessarily paid a $10 million prepayment penalty, resulting in a total purchase price of $88,472,958.32. The transaction closed on the 19th of September, 2019. Mr. Speaker, having satisfied the Tranche B obligations, we then negotiated purchasing the Tranche C loans from Arch and Axis. The purchase price was limited to $75 million principal, plus $5 million of guaranteed interest. Thus, total consideration was $90 million, and the transaction closed on the 7th of October, 2019. At the time, the total owing on the loan, considering default interest rates and PIK, otherwise known as payment in kind interest, was over $99 million, and today is almost $109 million. This action avoided wasteful potential litigation with two of our most important international business partners. Mr. Speaker, the Bermuda government did more than just this, however. We also committed to purchase the claims of the developer, of the contractors and subcontractors who had been left unpaid by the developers. We worked with the main contractor, DCK Bermuda, to understand the extent that they and so many Bermudian subcontractors had been left unpaid by the developers. We did not have a legal obligation to do so. It was of national economic importance for them to be paid immediately, while we took the necessary time to evaluate a way forward and a way to get the money back to the people of Bermuda. On the 20th of December 2019, we purchased DCK's claims for a total price of $11,051,437.29 and immediately began paying subcontractors. Mr. Speaker, these were business people who had placed their faith in the developers, much like the former government had done, and had been left financially holding the proverbial bag. We used the new borrowing to purchase their claims and added them to the amounts paid on the loans outstanding and the interest on those loans to arrive at what the Bermuda government is owed on the Caroline Bay project. Mr. Speaker, I set out in précis the steps the Bermuda government has taken to date. We raised $200 million in bank debt at 4.25%. We acquired the defaulted loans from the Tranche B and Tranche C lenders. We acquired claims from contractors and subcontractors, thereby providing them with the funding that they had been outstanding for over a year. We bought the Tranche B and Tranche C loans to satisfy our legal obligations and to provide us with the full suite of legal remedies available to the previous debt holders. We applied to the Supreme Court of Bermuda and were successful in appointing joint provisional liquidators from leading accounting and audit firm EY over operating company Georges Bay Limited. Mr. Speaker, the Bermuda government now has a 98.8% of the claims outstanding against Georges Bay Limited. To date, the developers have not paid anything on the outstanding claims. Surprisingly, they commenced a public relations campaign to encourage the Bermuda government to provide them with a second chance on the deal. We have made detailed comments in the press as to why we will not engage in a second transaction with them. So there is little benefit to repeating those statements here, except to reiterate that but the recent revelation that Starwood Capital had not agreed to provide financing on this deal came as a surprise to the Bermuda government as well. This having been alleged on numerous occasions since December of 2019 by the developers. Mr. Speaker, Joint Provisional Liquidators, or JPLs, are independent and are under the sanction of the Bermuda courts. By law, they are entitled to have access to all books and records of an insolvent company so as to examine what rights the company may have against parties involved for the benefit of creditors. That investigation began on their appointment, and to date they have concluded initial interviews with each of the directors and have been provided with access to the records of the law firm representing GBL and the auditors for the company. Access to the files of GBL and the books and records held by their directors continue to be provided to the JPLs as well. The JPLs are undertaking several actions on the behalf of the company in the best interests of the creditors as a whole. Firstly, they are assessing the affairs of the company and are reviewing the statements, bank records, emails, and corporate documents to determine what steps were taken inside the company and where funds have been spent. Once they have completed this exercise, they will be in a position to determine if any party associated with the insolvent company bears any liability and or responsibility for the massive losses visited on the people of Bermuda. Secondly, Mr. Speaker, they are engaged in a construction review process to determine what the status of the various buildings are and what work needs to be concluded in the very near term to maintain the best value in the company's assets. The review includes an assessment of what it would cost to complete the project as currently designed and what, in the current market, its best use might be. Finally, Mr. Speaker, they will engage in a process to sell the company's assets so as to raise funds to satisfy creditor claims. This part of the process is at an early stage and will be determined over the next few months while the above steps are underway. As the largest creditor and the only secured creditor in the process, the Bermuda government is well placed to be paid the proceeds of any sale or to receive the assets as partial payment of funds owed. Mr. Speaker, I'm certain that honorable members will be united in supporting the efforts of the JPLs to bring clarity to this project and holding accountable all who are deemed responsible for the losses the people of Bermuda have suffered. The government of Bermuda and the JPLs, respectively, have each commenced further winding up proceedings against two companies, Commodore Limited, owned by Caroline Bay Limited, and Caroline Bay Marina Limited, owned by Georges Bay Limited. Both companies failed to pay creditors' outstanding debts when they became due and are part of the wider Caroline Bay Group. A complex series of legal proceedings has been commenced by the JPL seeking to determine why the Caroline Bay project collapsed and who was responsible for the project's failing. Speaker, while much of the activity at present is in the hands of the JPLs, the Bermuda government is concurrently preparing to assume responsibility for the assets should they be used in partial satisfaction of the outstanding claims owed to the people of Bermuda. Our advisors will have access to the reports on best use and cost to complete, and on the basis of a detailed analysis, we will be able to determine the best way to get value out of the project. Mr. Speaker, honorable members should be aware that we are also open to working with qualified professional developers in finding a way forward that mutually benefits the people of Bermuda. We are intentionally setting a high bar, however, for any potential partnership. Partners will have to demonstrate a history of successful work on projects of the size and scope represented by Caroline Bay, and will have to have capital they can commit to the project in the form of actual cash equity alongside the Bermuda government. We will also insist that they have the highest integrity, all of which must be the case before they can be even considered. Mr. Speaker, as I said previously, the land at Caroline Bay continues to represent an important opportunity for Bermuda. The economics of the development must be recast and devised with a realistic view of the world economy. This opportunity is too important to squander. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. The next statement this morning is in the name of the Minister of Transport, Mr. Terrell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Good morning, Mr. Speaker. Good morning.
Good morning. Continue. Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you. Good morning, colleagues, and good morning, Bermuda. Can you hear me, Mr. Speaker?
Yes, we hear you.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, today I am bringing to the attention of the House the impact on the people of Bermuda of the project agreement for the Alf Wade International Airport redevelopment scheme in this time of the coronavirus pandemic. Mr. Speaker, the House will recall that at the last election, this government pledged to review that project agreement to see if Bermuda could get a better deal. As we stated categorically at the time, the review was necessary because of the lack of transparency, the lack of consultation on the airport redevelopment project by the previous government, the lack of competitive procurement, and real concerns regarding the transfer off island of revenues from the airport. Mr. Speaker, as many will now know, the review uncovered some unwelcome facts, not least of which concerns the revenue structure of the deal. In addition to the government no longer sharing in the revenues generated by the airport, the project agreement enshrines an obligation of the government of Bermuda to provide support to the Bermuda Skyport Corporation Limited, Skyport, in certain circumstances. Mr. Speaker, to fully understand the situation we find ourselves in, it is important to know the project agreement provides for Skyport to receive a guaranteed minimum regulated revenue. This minimum revenue is backstopped by the government of Bermuda. The onset of COVID-19 was likely to trigger the limited government support provisions of the project agreement. And earlier this month, it did. When regularly scheduled commercial flights were necessarily stopped in March due to the global pandemic, there was an immediate drop in revenue to Skyport. Skyport duly delivered the required revenue guarantee certificate to the airport authority days after the end of the second quarter of the calendar year, 1st of April, 30th of June. Mr. Speaker, to be clear, this is the same guarantee the previous administration assured members of this honorable House would never be needed. This certificate declared the actual regulated revenue received by Skyport during the second quarter fell short of the guaranteed minimum regulated revenue for the quarter as set out in the project agreement. As a result, the airport authority is obliged to transfer funds to cover the shortfall. This means the Bermuda Airport Authority must transfer $5,770,995.54. I'll repeat that, Mr. Speaker. $5,770,995.54 to the Guaranteed Revenue Reserve Account, which is managed by Skyport at a bank in New York, and that was done this week. However, in doing so, the government has had to authorize an additional grant to the airport authority to enable it to meet its obligation. Make no mistake, this hurts. Bermuda's economy has taken a significant hit as a result of the coronavirus. There are many people unemployed or underemployed. Businesses are unable to generate sufficient revenue to cover their costs. There are limited air leisure visitors and no cruise ship calls at all. Mr. Speaker, while Skyport is made whole by the addition of this $5.7 million, Bermuda has citizens who are being made destitute at this time. This government has pledged that no person will go hungry. And instead of caring for our local community, which is in desperate need, the government is having to put money towards an airport redevelopment project we were assured was structured in a way that transferred the development risk away from the people of Bermuda. ensuring the redevelopment was financed through airport revenues. However, as it turns out, if the revenues are not coming in, then restitution lies with the Bermuda government. Mr. Speaker, although commercial flights resumed at the beginning of July, it will take some time to build up to the air arrival numbers we enjoyed previously. Therefore, the government assumes that it will be forced to provide the airport authority with additional supplementary funds at quarterly intervals this year. Yes, this will impact the support and services we are able to deliver to our people. Mr. Speaker, it is hard to avoid thinking about just what could be done for the people of Bermuda if we were to inject $5.7 million elsewhere. For that sum of money, Mr. Speaker, we could start much needed capital upgrades at the National Sports Center, or enhance food security, providing sites for new types of farming, such as vertical farming, aquaculture, and mariculture. Or we could respond positively to the needs of charities, especially those providing for families in hardship as a result of COVID-19. Some may ask, well, why don't you just terminate the agreement? Mr. Speaker, first of all, as we have indicated in the past, the project agreement is not easily terminated, and the negative consequences of doing so, although legally possible, would have severe ramifications for Bermuda's reputation, to the extent that it would be irresponsible to pursue it at this time. Mr. Speaker, others may say, well, just change the agreement. The review of the project agreement carried out in late 2017 highlighted the fact that there is no ability to change any of the provisions in the agreement. The only way to make substantive changes to its terms and conditions is to terminate it, and again, this would have harsh consequences. Mr. Speaker, this government remains deeply dismayed with the failings of the previous administration to protect Bermuda's interests in the framing of the project agreement, and particularly troubled by the revenue structure of the deal. However, as we have stated before, we are a responsible government, and we will ensure the Bermuda Airport Authority is able to honor its contractual obligations. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. The next statement this morning is in the name of the Minister of Works. Minister of Works, would you like to present your statement?
Good morning, Mr. Speaker. Yes, I will.
Good morning. Proceed.
Mr. Speaker, outlined in the government's platform of 2017 were a number of commitments made that were designed to enhance the lives of our citizens. Specific to the Ministry of Public Works, the government committed to reviewing the current system for handling water and wastewater, and to work with the private sector to facilitate systems that would properly treat sewage waste across the island, which also includes two municipalities. To that end, I wish to provide an update on the status of the water and wastewater master plan implementation. Mr. Speaker, the Cabinet authorized the establishment of a working steering committee under the responsibility of the Ministry of Public Works with the objective of implementing the recommendations of the strategy for sustainable water and wastewater servicing for the St. George Water and Wastewater Master Plan. The Cabinet further authorized the expansion of that plan to include the installation of an infrastructure corridor and the vetting of a waste and water recovery utility, which would incorporate the Times Bay Waste-to-Energy Facility as a source of green energy. Mr. Speaker, the Working Steering Committee, in collaboration with Bermuda Land Development Company, initiated a project that would provide potable water, sanitary, sewer, and reclaimed water infrastructure to the areas of Southside, the islands of St. David's and St. George's, which includes the new St. Regis Hotel. It is envisioned that this project will serve as the template for an island-wide water and wastewater master plan, with the above being phase one. Mr. Speaker, phase one has a very aggressive timeline with requirements for all works, including the potable water, sanitary sewer, and reclaimed water connections, to be undertaken at the St. Regis Hotel site by December 31st, 2020. To assist in delivering on the project requirements, the BODC has returned the services of Millhouse Engineering and Construction of Chicago to provide program management and some engineering services. The BODC has also retained On-Site Engineering of Bermuda to provide engineering support services. Millhouse began providing services on the project in mid-February of this year and has developed an overall Phase 1 project execution plan that has established 7 separate work packages based on geographic area and specialty scope of work. Mr. Speaker, the establishment of the 7 separate work packages also facilitates concurrent design of each of the packages and after tendering award, concurrent construction of each of those packages. For the construction phase, it is anticipated that 4 to 7 local contractors will be performing work simultaneously. The logic incorporated into the overall Phase 1 master schedule is driven by the requirement for final connection of potable water, sanitary sewer, and reclaimed water for the commissioning at the St. Regis Hotel by December 31st, as stated earlier. Mr. Speaker, one of the critical components of the project is the fusion welding of the high-density polyethylene or HDPE piping that is required to connect piping segments and fittings. The project specifications will require that this fusion welding be performed by contract employees that have been trained and or certified in fusion welding. In an effort to address this need, the program management team is working on a plan to train and vet local persons in fusion welding who could then participate in the works. The scheme also plans to bring a training firm to the island as soon as possible to provide manufacturer training and certification to Bermudians. Mr. Speaker, oversight of construction works will also be a critical component of the quality assurance, quality control of the program. Millhouse recommends the engagement of a specialized site supervisor, more than likely from overseas, who will lead a team of field inspectors to oversee the works in the field by ensuring these works are being performed in accordance to the plan and specifications. The field inspectors will be Bermudians. Mr. Speaker, multiple stakeholder coordination meetings have already occurred with the Departments of Planning, Environment and Natural Resources, Public Lands and Buildings, and Works and Engineering. During these meetings, the 7 work packages were presented in turn. The departments provided valuable input and guidance on the process and submittal for securing the necessary approvals, permits, and agreements. Communication and coordination with these stakeholders is ongoing. Mr. Speaker, there have also been stakeholder meetings with the Corporation of St. George's Club Management, and Hotel Co., the St. Regis Hotel developer. One of the most critical phases of the project will be the tender and negotiation and tender award phase. As previously mentioned, the project execution plan includes a plan for construction to be performed concurrently on 7 separate work packages. The tendering and negotiation and tendering award on all 7 of the work packages planned to occur by mid-August. The 7 separate tender packages are as follows. Tender package 1, piping infrastructure to Stokes Point water crossing. Tender 2, piping infrastructure and lift station 2A, Stokes Point to Echo Lane, 2B, Echo Lane to Tiger Bay lift station, 2C, Rose Hill to St. Regis and Market Square, 2D, Tiger Bay intersection to St. Regis, 2E, St. Regis Hotel property, 2F, St. George's lift station upgrades. And the package 3, stormwater sanitary sewer separation, south side area 3A East, 3B Central, and 3C Gravity West. Mr. Speaker, tender package 4, Southside wastewater treatment plant facility upgrades. Tender package 5, potable water reservoir transfer, network 5A East, 5B West, potable and reclaimed water reservoir transfer network pumps and controls. This package will involve the interconnection of 6 existing potable water reservoirs across the Southside property. Existing pumping stations will be utilized where appropriate. New pumping stations will be designed and constructed where necessary. These pumping stations will provide distribution to the local customer zone, as well as allow water to be transferred back to the network to fill other reservoirs. Under Package 6, Reclaim Water Force Main to Reservoir 6. This package includes the tie-in of the treated wastewater treatment plant effluent, reclaimed water, with the non-potable flushing systems in the town of St. George's. This will involve converting Reservoir 6 from potable water to effluent. Under Package 7, Telemetry. The telemetry project will include standalone primary flow, level, and pressure sensing instruments, as well as interfaces to lift and pump station programmable logic controllers, all communicating by way of fiber or wireless data transmission to the host system. Contingency plan for St. Regis Hotel wastewater treatment. One of the primary goals of the Phase 1 program is to provide potable water, sanitary sewer, and affluent water to the St. Regis Hotel by December 31st. The risk in delivering these products by the required date were evaluated, and it was determined that potential delays with the installation of the piping could have an adverse impact on the sanitary sewer force main connection to the St. Regis Hotel. To address this risk, contingency plans have been and continue to be further developed to ensure that wastewater disposal capabilities are in place and fully functional at the St. Regis Hotel by December 31st this year. Mr. Speaker, the project budget amount for these 7 packages is $5 million. A financial feasibility report for Phase 1 has been completed and delivered to the LDC and is being used to raise capital for the construction phase of the project. Both local and international financing entities are being considered. Mr. Speaker, there are also legislative amendments required to establish the LDC with the protections typically afforded a utility, as well as the ring fencing of operations associated with this project until such time as a utility is created and operations transferred to the aforementioned utility. In addition to the aforementioned Phase 1 work, Phases 2 and 3 of the overall island-wide project are also in progress. Mr. Speaker, the Tynes Bay Waste-to-Energy Facility and the Corporation of Hamilton form an intricate part of the overall plan. It is envisaged that the Tynes Bay site would incorporate a new sewage treatment plant that will receive the sewage waste from the Corporation of Hamilton and the Corporation of St. George's, both of which are currently pumping sewage waste into our pristine marine environment. A practice that must stop in Bermuda as a first world nation. Not only that, but as an island that depends on rainwater for the majority of its freshwater supply, and as we enter a new era of global warming, we should change our perception of sewage from that of a waste product to rather a renewable resource that should be recovered, but that we are now simply throwing away. Mr. Speaker, to that end, the new sewage treatment plant would process sewage into non-potable water that can be used for irrigation, flushing, or any other non-potable use that will offset use of more expensive fresh water as it is today. Furthermore, it is envisioned that this new sewage plant will be powered by the existing Tynes Bay Waste-to-Energy Facility, which would in turn utilize the resulting sludge from the sewage treatment plant as a fuel source. Power from Tynes Bay would then be used to produce increased amounts of potable water via the already existing seawater reverse osmosis plant and non-potable water from the sewage plant, which would then in turn be sold as revenue streams for the new utility. Mr. Speaker, in essence, the Tynes Bay facility would cease to be simply a waste-to-energy plant and become a fully integrated waste and water recovery utility that would produce fresh water from the garbage and sewage. It is our hope that such a novel concept will not only be beneficial to the revitalization and longevity of the island's waste and water infrastructure, but will be attractive to outside investors looking for green and blue initiatives that protect the environment while producing a positive return for their investors. In this regard, we are soon to be awarding contracts for feasibility studies to proof test the business viability of the concept, as well as determine the regulatory framework required so that potential investors, even local and private ones, can visualize the future potential of the initiative and capitalize on what is hoped to be a long-term growth potential entity that will serve Bermuda's sustainability into the future. We recognize that this is a huge undertaking that will take several years to complete, but we believe that it sets us on a path of environmentally addressing wastewater needs and provides both municipalities the opportunity to address once and for all the better alternative to dealing with their sewage waste and dumping it into the ocean. We have all agreed to work collaboratively together to bring this to fruition. Of course, Mr. Speaker, what is most important at this stage is to create new employment and generate economic activity in the country to help our economy recover. Against that backdrop, Mr. Speaker, I will commit to keeping this Honorable House and the people of Bermuda informed as we progress through the various phases. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. I believe the next statement is also yours. Would you like to proceed with that one?
Yes, please, Mr. Speaker.
Continue on.
Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to bring my third report on the state of plans for the Ottawa A. Simmons International Arbitration Center. Mr. Speaker, to remind, in 2017, the Bermuda Business Development Corporation originally proposed that the vacant property be converted into an international arbitration center. And in 2018, and in the 2018 speech from the throne, it was announced that this would be the direction of the government and that the building would be renamed the Ottawa A. Simmons International Arbitration Center in honor of this most distinguished Bermudian. Mr. Speaker, although this facility is intended to serve as an international arbitration center that brings with the exposure and income for Bermuda on the macro level, the government's policy is that it must also serve as a mediation center for residents who may have minor disputes that, if handled here, result in a reduction in the number of cases heard by the courts or submitted to the Office of the Ombudsman. Upon investigation, it was discovered by our engineers that both the Allenhurst and the adjoining Valerie T. Scott buildings needed to be demolished. Mr. Speaker, in March this year, demolition of the Valerie T. Scott building was completed, with the demolition works to the Allenhurst building getting underway shortly thereafter, only to be delayed several months as a result of the COVID-19 virus. Once the shelter in place was lifted, the works recommenced and both sites are now cleared and ready for new construction. In my February 14th report to the House, I indicated that discussions were fairly well advanced towards developing a public-private partnership to build the center, and once there is an agreement, I will report further to this House. Mr. Speaker, in September last year, Bermudian attorney Mr. Kevin Bean introduced the ministry to Millhouse Engineering and Construction Inc., a professional, full-service engineering and architectural firm located in downtown Chicago, with several locations within the continental U.S. and international. Mr. Bean, who now serves as general counsel for Millhouse, spoke of their extensive experience in engineering, construction, and developing water and sewage systems around the world, felt that Bermuda could benefit from their expertise. Shortly thereafter, the chairman and CEO of Millhouse, Mr. Wilbur Millhouse III, along with Senior Vice President Mr. Frank Martin, visited Bermuda for initial introductions and discussions. Several meetings were held with our engineers and the executive management of the three quangos that fall under the ministry. Mr. Speaker, in December 2019, I, along with the Permanent Secretary, Randy Rochester, and Principal Water and Sewage Engineer, Tariq Christopher, paid a visit to the Millhouse headquarters in Chicago to discuss the master water and sewage plan for the country. And during these talks, it became evident that Millhouse, with its extremely diverse team of international engineers, architects, designers, planners, and project managers, not only provide advice on the water and sewage plan, but other capital projects. One such project was the development of the Ottawa A. Simmons Arbitration Center, which Millhouse proposed as a public-private partnership at no cost to the government. A memorandum of understanding was entered into by Millhouse ministry which delineated responsibilities of each during this initiative to ensure its ultimate success. Mr. Speaker, as part of the MOU, the ministry introduced Millhouse to the team at the Bermuda Business Development Agency, who in turn shared their research on arbitration centers globally. A local architect was engaged and plans for the building were prepared based on the research of both parties. The result was a set of plans for a 5-story building tabled early in this session that includes, photographs of which were tabled earlier in this session, that includes meeting rooms, office space, retail space on the first floor in accordance with the city plan, a cafeteria, elevators, underground parking with private access for those wishing to remain discreet, to entertainment space on the balcony for casual negotiations or receptions. Mr. Speaker, the details of the financing of this project is at the final hurdle. The term sheet is still being reviewed by the Ministry of Finance, and as soon as we get the green light, the financing specifics of the project will likewise be shared. We anticipate an early response that will lead to construction beginning in December this year and delivery of a complete building 15 months later in March 2022. Mr. Speaker, the principals of Millhouse are expected on island next week for an official groundbreaking in the presence of Mr. Otterwood Simmons and others involved in the project thus far. Mr. Speaker, this will be a world-class facility with the potential to put Bermuda on the map, as well as to encourage local lawyers to go into the arbitration field. And of course, it cannot be lost on anyone that this too will also provide jobs and economic stimulus in the country when it is most needed. Mr. Speaker, I am greatly excited by this project as it is what public works should be doing, knocking down old buildings and building anew. I am convinced that Millhouse are the perfect team to build a relationship with to our mutual benefit. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Minister, I believe you have a further statement. Would you like to proceed with that one?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just one more.
All right, Minister, continue.
Mr. Speaker, in the government's 2017 platform, we outlined the following in relation to arable land and community gardens. And I quote, firstly, to lease the many acres of government arable land that are currently not being used in order to boost domestic food production. The incentive is to modernize the equipment used to boost productivity and make the domestic industry more profitable, and to promote and develop community gardens that can assist in meeting the needs of the less fortunate in our community. Mr. Speaker, the government owns 38 plots of arable/farmland across the island. I'm pleased to report that 32 of these lots are currently leased. 3 are in legal disputes over its ownership. 2 are presently out to tender, and the final plot will shortly be put out to tender. Mr. Speaker, this government has demonstrated its commitment to farming by both formalizing lease renewals and providing longer leases so that farmers have security of tenure and thus the ability to gain loans for equipment, machinery, and improvements. As an example, the lease for Westover Farm was renewed in May last year for 21 years. I think that is a clear demonstration of our commitment. Turning now to community gardens, Mr. Speaker, everyone will be familiar with the longest established and most well-known Pro Lane community garden. This garden was established in 1984 and continues to flourish to this day. This is a perfect example of a project that leads to a wider community collaboration well beyond gardening. Mr. Speaker, the garden has been led by Dr. Gloria and Mr. Rolf Frederick from the very beginning in 1984. An incredible 36-year journey that clearly demonstrates their passion, and they have not been selfish with sharing their knowledge to all those who have sought their advice. I spoke with Mr. Frederick this week to pick his brain, something I do on a regular basis, and was delighted to learn that Arrest and were bringing some of their seniors to tour the garden. They welcome groups all the time. I would like to publicly thank the Fredericks for their many years of commitment and dedication to this magnificent project. Mr. Speaker, government is fully committed to doing its part to aid in boosting the growth of the agricultural industry. The plan is to establish a community garden in every parish. We aim to ensure the public is aware of future sites that will soon be available so they can become involved. Various plots will be open and available to the general public, and very little experience is required to become involved. All that is needed is a love for your community and a desire to feed our own. It's clear that each garden must have a leader, ideally from the neighborhood who is passionate about gardening, who will be the driving force to making it a success. Mr. Speaker, before the pandemic, we established a community garden at Gibbs Hill Lighthouse Park, and this has proven to be very successful and well received by the Southampton community. It has now been named Serenity Garden and is managed by the husband and wife team of Mr. Dave and Mrs. Josiel Blake. They have been unrelenting in pushing for this to happen and have been instrumental with teaming up with various government departments to push the plan forward. I'd specifically like to thank Nika Smith, acting park planner, and Stephen Furbett, senior superintendent, for all their assistance in getting the garden started. Mr. Speaker, there are a number of new sites on the horizon. Currently, there are 2 sites competing to come online next. Avocado Lodge Park at the top of Corkscrew Hill, which is currently being cleared of brush and invasive trees, and the T.N. Tatum Community Partners Garden, which has been cleared and prepared for mapping out of the plots. Tatum is being led by boxer Nikki Bascom with assistance from the Blakeneys. There is also support from the other community partners at Tatum, as well as several neighbors from Stadium Lane who have put in their requests already for plots. There are 3 other sites on the horizon. Southland's East, a plot at Tudor Farm, and St. David's Community Garden at Lourdes. So if there are interested persons willing to lead any of these sites, please come forward and volunteer so that they can become operative in short order. As I stated earlier, these projects must be led by persons who have a passion for gardening. Please contact Nika Smith, acting park planner at the Department of Parks to express their interest. Mr. Speaker, separately, it should be noticed that not much land is required to create your own backyard garden. We know this to be so from the number of requests we've had for mulch from Marsh Folly. So much so that over the last few weeks, we have been delivering truckloads of mulch to both Serenity and Tatum, as well as to several community areas that are available for collection from various neighborhood sites, such as Parish Primary, the Government Gate, Devonshire Community Garden, and Death Valley Field. We are available to deliver to other parts of the island in support of what we are calling the COVID home garden. Members of the public can simply speak to their member of parliament, and he or she will make the necessary arrangements for a community drop location in your neighborhood. Anyone can help themselves to the mulch if they choose. They can also collect it from Marsh Folly 24 hours a day, and it's free. Follow the signs, it's literally at the entrance to Marsh Folly. Mr. Speaker, I've asked the Director of Parks to incorporate within the registry of community gardens a process whereby we can record production output, which we can share with the community, as well as generate data for our own records. I'd also like to invite those private landowners who have unused plots of land that is suitable for a community garden to consider creating one. Again, the Department of Parks will be more than willing to lend a hand in getting it organized. Mr. Speaker, I live near Lighthouse Hill and have seen that project from an overgrown, weed-infested piece of land to the spectacular garden it is today, as well as the community benefit of neighbors interacting and working positively together. I again wish to thank the Blakeneys for being the driving force behind making it a reality. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. And that brings us to an end of your statements this morning, Minister. The next statement on the order paper is actually has been withdrawn, and we'll move on to the statement by the Minister of Health. Minister of Health, would you like to present your statement?
Yes, good morning, Mr. Speaker.
Good morning.
Mr. Speaker and honorable members, in early February 2020, prior to COVID-19 becoming a pandemic, the whole world recognized that in order to prepare for the very likely pandemic, personal protective equipment, or PPE supplies, testing regimes, and other preparations were required to fight the inevitable. Amongst the many preparations required, the ministry began to procure and source PPE, determine what local testing capacity was on island, and determine all other aspects required to prepare for the ongoing pandemic. The total cost of the Ministry of Health's fight against COVID-19 as of the 17th of July 2020 is approximately $5.9 million. Mr. Speaker, you would be aware that many countries struggled tremendously in March and April, specifically with PPE sourcing and testing capabilities. However, Bermuda did not encounter significant on-island challenges as it relates to PPE supplies and testing due to proactive procurement and preparedness by the Ministry of Health. The government of Bermuda anticipated the fast approaching need for testing materials and PPE, whilst the Ministry of Health team sourced the globe, determined that our small country's inventory of these vital weapons against this virus would rival those held by far larger countries. I speak mainly of these two items specifically as they are two of the core ammunition needed in the fight against COVID and are approximately $5.3 million, or 90% of the total cost. In February, an aggressive search began to identify on-island testing capabilities to minimize the waiting time for results and to increase testing capacity. Mr. Speaker, at that time, the Caribbean Public Health Agency, or CARPA, which is located in Trinidad, was engaged by Bermuda to complete testing, but was limited to 20 tests per week, and the results were received in approximately 5 working days. The ministry, therefore, engaged Helix, Genetic, and Scientific Solutions to provide on-island testing, which produced results within 24 to 48 hours, and this was a tremendous feat for Bermuda. The ability to test locally provided a significant drop in the wait time for results. The local testing gave the ability to do significantly more tests and test on a daily basis, with the most tests in a day being 190 at that time. Pan American Health Organization, or PAHO, which is a branch agent under the World Health Organization, gave Bermuda kudos for the ability to get testing, validation, and quality control checks in place in record time, and upon their review of the process, they gave the blessing for the Helix lab to be one of the few approved COVID-19 testing labs in the region at that time. Mr. Speaker, through the efforts of our Bermudian scientist, Dr. Desiree Spriggs and her team, combined with their commitment to a level of testing standards not previously seen on our shores, we were amongst the first of the Caribbean countries to receive this accolade. Helix was able to implement the equivalent levels of measures for COVID-19 testing as CARPA. Dr. Desiree Spriggs and her team were significantly instrumental in ensuring Bermuda's testing regime was up and running in record time, and Bermuda could combat against the virus, and we are all ever so thankful for Dr. Spriggs and her team. However, since which the access to testing has become more available and more cost effective, and therefore the Helix contract was terminated with the 45-day notice clause, giving the last date of the service of 14th of June 2020. The total cost for the Helix contract was $481,809. Mr. Speaker, additionally, the ministry purchased a polymerized chain reaction, a PCR machine, to increase the testing capacity. The machine costs $154,000 and is currently in use at the Molecular Diagnostics Laboratory, the MDL. MDL, managed by yet another Bermudian scientist, Dr. Karika Weldon, is currently doing testing at exponential volumes and at present averaging 500 tests per day. Dr. Weldon has taken the baton in the COVID-19 race and is ensuring we are a step ahead by providing testing results within hours of the collection. Dr. Weldon has provided the country a continuum of services that Bermuda will benefit from for many years to come. And again, we are ever so grateful to her and her team. Testing supplies such as swabs, collection kits, tubes, pipettes, reagents, collection bags, and viral medium have been purchased by the ministry for approximately $386,000. Mr. Speaker, without a doubt, early access to testing gave Bermuda the head start it needed to counteract the pandemic, and hence one of the fundamental reasons why we are currently doing well in the fight against COVID-19. Mr. Speaker, understanding the immediate and urgent need for PPE that the whole world was facing in early March, the ministry partnered with BHB to procure supplies, as BHB maintains a robust procurement system with efficiencies that currently do not exist within government. Some of those efficiencies include a wide network of overseas vendors, a controlled payment system that provides a quicker turnaround for payments, an experienced commercial director who manages health and medical procurement at large levels, and an inventory model for large quantities of health and medical supplies. The partnership with BHB reduced the risk of the ministry encountering what many other countries encountered, such as tendering with fake vendors and the inability to urgently pay for supplies. Mr. Speaker, in early March, it was clear that the entire country did not have sufficient PPE in preparation for the longevity and magnitude of the oncoming pandemic. Main sectors that required PPE were as follows: the Bermuda hospital boards, the care homes, the Ministry of Health frontline workers, the essential services such as police, regiment, and customs, etc., government employees requiring PPE, community physicians, and the public, as in early March, cloth masks had not been introduced as a sufficient form of mask, so therefore, at that time, medical masks were being considered for the public as well. Supplies were purchased on the basis of ensuring Bermuda was cared for as a whole, and procurement proceeded in that principle. Small to large orders were made locally and overseas to prevent Bermuda from having a PPE shortage similar to the United States, which had devastating consequences. Procuring is a simple task, but the logistics of getting large orders to Bermuda was a colossal task due to name a few, Mr. Speaker, the many closures of borders around the world, ad hoc regulations being implemented in many countries, the lack of cargo space on the limited cargo vessels, long lead times for production of supplies due to shortages, and severe price gouging. Some specific examples of the challenges were when President Trump declared that there would be no exporting of PPE products from the U.S. to any other country. This prohibition was not only a major setback on available options, but there were instances where country supplies were in transit via the U.S., their goods were allegedly seized. In fact, a container belonging to Bermuda with supplies was detained in the United States, and it took many hands on deck to assist to get it released. Another example was when a large order of masks was due to be delivered by FedEx, and the Chinese authorities added more PPE regulations, which delayed the masks from being shipped. However, it was navigated expeditiously, and we received the masks timely. Many hours of work went into mitigating these various impediments, which resulted in Bermuda having PPE in time to alleviate what could have been a travesty for our country. Mr. Speaker, the ministry created a small team to work through the logistics of getting the orders of PPE to Bermuda, which included the commercial director at BHB, BHB staff, ministry headquarters staff, and associates in China. Some of the large orders included 610 surgical masks, 500,000 N95 masks, 30,000 face shields, 100,000 swabs, 500,000 pair of gloves, 5,000 digital thermometers, and 480 infrared thermometers. Other significant supplies were purchased from some of our local vendors, which included but not limited to hand sanitizers and preempt wipes. Mr. Speaker, the country has benefited tremendously by the proactive procurement of the PPEs, which are fundamental tools in fighting COVID-19. All sectors such as BHB, the care homes, police, customs, the regiment, Ministry of Health frontline workers, etc., continue to source from the PPE supplies stored at the government warehouse. Additionally, with the reopening of government at full capacity, the PPE supplies are ordered daily and the burn rate has increased due to the need by some government employees when in particular work environment. Due to proactive procuring, Bermuda is now well placed with the basic PPE supplies for a period of approximately 10 to 12 months. This period includes an anticipated second wave later in the calendar year. However, we all must be aware that most supplies are disposable and can rapidly deplete. Additionally, the supply par levels are subject to change due to possible outbreaks or unexpected changes in the COVID-19 pandemic. The estimated cost for PPE is currently $4.3 million. Mr. Speaker, other costs related to the COVID-19 fight include costs for service providers to swab and administer the testing sites, the call center management, the maintaining of the government warehouse for supplies, and the staff required to meet the public health safety requirements and demands. Mr. Speaker, I have discussed PPE, testing, and other material components of fighting COVID-19, but I've saved the best for last. We can have all the PPE, tests, equipment, laws, and policies as tools to fight the pandemic, but they can only have value if we have the right people to manage the tools. Mr. Speaker, I cannot express enough gratitude to all of the essential workers that have worked tirelessly and selfishly for their country. They are the backbone to this fight and have not wavered once, even at our lowest point. Many have worked through this crisis while sacrificing time with their families and loved ones to save others. Our essential workers must be saluted to the highest degree and be recognized for being the soldiers that they are. Mr. Speaker, when COVID-19 brought the world to its knees, our essential workers stood up on their feet and fought a good fight like true champions, and I consider them Bermuda's heroes. I know I speak for the entire community. Tremendous gratitude to those people who serve as our essential workers and put the community first. And I would like to say a wholeheartedly thank you, and thank you for all that you have done and continue to do to keep our island of Bermuda safe. In closing, Mr. Speaker, as the Minister of Health, I stand here today to express the magnitude of my appreciation and eternal gratitude to the team at the Ministry of Health. I was truly blessed to have a team worthy of the challenges thrown before them. Mr. Speaker, these women and men have risen above anything that could be reasonably asked. They have given up nights with their families, weekends with friends, and many, many hours of sleep. Mr. Speaker, we would not be here today looking to rebuild our tourism product, turn around our economy, or enjoy restaurant dining, boating, or even grocery shopping on a daily basis, if not for their efforts. Mr. Speaker, leaders usually have the opportunity to carefully select their team. I am fortunate enough to have been asked to lead the health team. Mr. Speaker, I can say unequivocally, the team I was blessed with has surpassed everything and anything any general going to war could ask for. Mr. Speaker, countless individuals across ministries, in the private sector, and in our communities have all banded together in the most professional way to ensure we got ahead of this pandemic. I am humbled, Mr. Speaker, by what I have witnessed these many, many, many months, particularly from the staff of the Ministry of Health. As we constantly say at the ministry, the fight against COVID is a marathon, not a sprint, and we have been running this marathon since late January. The level of dedication and professionalism which I have witnessed has no bounds. Ministry of Health staff members continuing to work from their hospital beds, curtailing valuable family time to return to the office late at night, ignoring medical orders to take time off, foregoing their time of quiet worship to return on a Sunday morning after having only left a few short hours prior. Mr. Speaker, in closing, I am proud to be the Minister of Health and proud of all we have accomplished under the most trying of times and in the most uncharted of waters. My appreciation, respect, and gratitude goes to everyone at the Ministry of Health, and my gratitude knows no limits. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. The next statement this morning is in the name of the Minister of Education. Minister, before I acknowledge you, I'm going to acknowledge the fact that you'll be requiring the House to allow you to adjust something that was done earlier. This morning when your paper was to be introduced, a Premier introduced it because I understand you were late. You were trying to make an amendment to what was there, and we weren't aware of the amendment. And the Premier went ahead and introduced it. After the statements are all completed by all ministers this morning, I will allow you to make the appropriate adjustment to what was done this morning. Okay? You can proceed with your statement now. We don't hear you, Minister. Is your mic on? We can see you, but we can't hear you. Minister, let us move on to the next minister while you resolve your technical matter. Minister Ming, are you ready to do your statement? And we'll come back to Minister Ban afterwards.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I can do my statement.
Please proceed.
Surely. Mr. Speaker, I rise today to inform this House about the Coast Guard activities over the past 5 months. The highlights being their role during the government's COVID-19 response, where they were protecting Bermuda's people and interests. Mr. Speaker, the Coast Guard was initially launched in February 2020, and since the COVID-19 regulations were introduced, the soldiers of the Coast Guard have been on 24-hour embodiment operations for 119 days. The Coast Guard has been manned by 9 soldiers on 24-hour operations, working on a rotation of 9 continuous days on duty away from their families, followed by 2 days rest. During this period, they have worked alongside 2 Bermuda Police Service Marine Section officers and 2 Parish constables with Sergeant Major Jeffrey Patterson, a 30-year veteran of the regiment commanding daily operations. Mr. Speaker, I take this opportunity to issue my personal thanks to those soldiers and police officers working in the Coast Guard who have and continue to keep our waters safe for all of us to enjoy. We are all indebted to their families as they have shouldered the enormous domestic burden whilst the soldiers and their lives have been away from their home for so long. Finally, we give thanks to their employers who have released these part-time soldiers from their normal work to serve their country during such a difficult time. Mr. Speaker, throughout this period, these part-time soldiers, in collaboration with their full-time police colleagues, have been living and operating from their depot at the police barracks and club in Dockyard. They have been active on the water for an average of 68%, patrolling in 4-hour cycles across the island. Their 7 vessels have performed over 1,942 hours of engine time during their 543 operations, averaging 4.56 patrols per day. Of the 119 days on operations, there were only 3 days where no patrols were conducted due to bad weather. They have recorded or intercepted 10,112 vessels, averaging 18.62 vessels per patrol. Mr. Speaker, this time on the water has seen this unit provide significant safety and security measures to ensure the safety of our people. In detail, they have issued tickets or assisted with 69 summonses for COVID-19 breaches, including raft ups or curfew offenses, arrested 11 individuals for suspicion of operating a vessel under the influence, issued 73 tickets for associated marine violations, such as no navigational lights, no safety equipment, 5 knots no rig, 100 meters from shore offenses.
Search and rescue of a lone kayaker on the night of June 14th during the thick fog mist. 9 responses to gang-related activity, performing 6 arrests. 1 arrest for lobster diving out of season, which was within the statutory 1-mile zone during the 23-hour shelter in place. The individual was convicted of the offenses the following day. 4 night operations for illegal fishing east of the St. George's area. 3 joint fisheries operations for illegal fishing within the East and West Hind Rock fish grounds. Collaborated with marine and ports in assisting the public with moorings as well as illegal vessels on public docks. Mr. Speaker, additionally, during this period, the Coast Guard has simultaneously dispatched personnel to conduct community advisory points in the east and west end of the island, conducted winching, formations, and communications testing with the Royal Navy's Royal Fleet Auxiliary Ship Argus on her way to patrol the Caribbean. RFA Argus, in collaboration with HMS Midway, are the 2 Royal Navy ships that stand by to assist Bermuda during times of exceptional disaster. Continuously performed daily quarantine checks on foreign sailing vessels in St. George's Harbor. Observed and stopped, reported 5 times individuals who had broken into the quarantine to the RCC and HM customs. Played an integral part in the arrest of the individual who jumped off a cliff in order to evade the BPS police unit. Arrested 1 non-compliant jet skier reserved for suspicion of operating a vessel under the influence and failing to proceed at a safe speed. Participated in the ongoing investigation of a fatal jet ski accident. Mr. Speaker, although the Royal Bermuda Regiment Coast Guard is designed to be a legally and operationally integral part of Bermuda's military, the soldiers have been operating under the auspices of the Bermuda Police Service's Special Constable Program. This is because the supporting legislation, namely the Defense Act Coast Guard Unit Amendment Act 2018, has not been put into effect. The Special Constable Program has allowed the soldiers to enforce health regulations and maritime security laws using police powers. Mr. Speaker, the Royal Bermuda Regiment were paid $1,000 at the start of the financial year to cover operating costs and hire 9 full-time and 14 part-time Coast Guard personnel. This hiring process was initially stalled by the effects of COVID-19, but the funding has now been frozen in their budget. They have identified, assessed, and shortlisted 9 highly qualified personnel to enlist when the embargo is lifted. Mr. Speaker, the regiment have requested $1.6 million in capital funds to purchase vessels to replace their aged fleet, which is predominantly comprised of retired vessels formerly from the BPS, some of which are over 30 years old. New vessels would be fit for road to carry out for their mandated task for travel for miles. It is the government's ultimate ambition of the next 10 years to be able to patrol and secure its entire maritime domain out to the 200 9 soldiers.
Minister, we seem to be losing you. If you can get closer to your mic or adjust it.
By 7 full-time police officers. I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman. Can you hear me now, Mr. Speaker? Is that better?
Yes,
Mr. Speaker.
yes,
Okay.
yes.
The initial tranche of 9 soldiers must be complemented by 7 full-time police officers or officers from other government departments who support maritime laws, such as marine and ports, customs, or environmental protection. The annual cost of salaries for a Coast Guard 40 men by 16 Royal Bermuda Regiment soldiers is $1.4 million. Mr. Speaker, the Coast Guard has proved its unquestionable worth and resilience over the past 4 months and is now working through the peak of the building season. The impending implementation of the Coast Guard Act is an important next step for Bermuda's maritime security and must be in tandem with employing the correct personnel for this vital role. Mr. Speaker, I reiterate my personal thanks to these officers
Minister, we lost you totally that time.
Mr. Speaker.
Yeah.
Do you need me to read the last part again? I'm sorry, because I didn't
Yes,
even know
please
you
do.
endorsed me. Okay.
Mr. Speaker, we heard as far as
from the initial tranche. Sorry, what was that, ma'am?
Mr. Speaker.
The
Yes.
initial tranche, I'm on page 5 in the last paragraph.
Okay.
The initial tranche of 9 soldiers must be complemented by 7 full-time police officers or officers from other government departments who support maritime laws, such as marine and ports, customs, or environmental protection. The annual cost of salaries for a Coast Guard fully manned by 16 Royal Bermuda Regiment soldiers is $1.4 million. Mr. Speaker, the Coast Guard has proved its unquestionable worth and resilience over the past 4 months and is now working through the peak of the building season. The impending implementation of the Coast Guard Act is an important next step for Bermuda's maritime security and must be in tandem with employing the correct personnel for this vital role. Mr. Speaker, I reiterate my personal thanks to these soldiers for their exceptional work since March, and to their families and employers who have humbly supported them whilst they have conducted their service to the country. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Honorable Member. Minister of Education, are you resolve your technical problem or?
Can you hear me, Mr. Speaker?
Yes, we can hear you. Would you like to present your statements?
If it pleases you, Mr. Speaker.
Continue.
Mr. Speaker, this morning I rise before this honorable House today, 2018 and 2019 audited final financial statement for the Bermuda College as stipulated in Section 8 of the Bermuda College Act, 1974. Mr. Speaker, I am pleased to report that the 2018 and 19 audited statements were both unqualified, and as such, in the opinion of the Auditor General, the statements present fairly the financial position of the Bermuda College at the end of each of the fiscal years and the results of its operations, changes in its net assets and cash flows. The financial statements indicate that Bermuda College had assets worth $24,675,615 and $23,861,691 in 2008 and 2019, respectively. The total liabilities of $19,473,229 and $19,078,451, respectively. Additionally, Mr. Speaker, it should be noted that the Bermuda College currently has no long-term debt. Cash and cash equivalents for the 2-year period decreased by 5.3% to $3,474,174. The accounts receivable increased by 39.3% to $863,913, and the account payable increased by 12.3%, stood at $2,692,315 at the end of the 2019 fiscal year. Mr. Speaker, since there has been no major capital investment at the Bermuda College, the capital assets continue to depreciate, and as of March 31st, 2019, totaled $16,649,154. However, with the establishment of the Bermuda College Foundation, it is expected that capital funding will be raised to upgrade the campus. Mr. Speaker, during the 2-year period, the government grant to the Bermuda College has remained consistent, while other revenue increased by $666,004, or 12%. However, over the same period, the physical plant and maintenance expense increased significantly, resulting in a deficit of $419,146 at the end of the 2019 fiscal period. Mr. Speaker, during the past several years, the Bermuda College and the Office of the Auditor General have been working assiduously to get the audits of the college up to date so that the Bermuda College can be in compliance with the financial standards of its accreditors. The Bermuda College audits were put in arrears when the former Auditor General decided to cease auditing Bermuda College in 2003, resulting as a result of the 2003 lease with the Cocoa Reef Hotel. Mr. Speaker, the audits of the Bermuda College did not begin again until 2008, and then were put on hold once again from 2009 to 2011, when a writ was filed by the former Auditor General against the then Finance Minister and Bermuda College, resulting in the extension of the term of the Cocoa Reef Hotel lease. Nonetheless, Mr. Speaker, the good news is this community for all of us to think about education for today and tomorrow, but to also have vision to execute and deliver a public school system which meets the needs and aspirations of our community for our children and the future of Bermuda. Mr. Speaker, in March of this year, I informed my honorable colleagues that the long-term objective strategy 5.3.5 and Plan 2022 will be the guide for our plan to phase out middle school and introduce signature schools and realign the public education system. This strategy states, and I quote, to ensure college and career readiness, we will review the current structure of schools, primary, middle, senior, and revise for the maximum student success, including the consideration of special school designs to meet unique student needs or interests. Mr. Speaker, to deliver the government and the community's wishes for public education, the Ministry of Education is currently overseeing the most substantive change in Bermuda's public education system in 20 years. Such immense change cannot be achieved in haste, nor can it be realized without consistent collaboration with critical and other stakeholders. It is those who make up our education system and broader community who will help facilitate and support this future-minded transformation. As Plan 2022 was developed with extensive community input, the plan to remake our school system will undergo similar levels of involvement before any changes are made. To quote our Honorable Premier, when asked about education reform in this House, I will quote, "We will measure not once, not twice, but 3 times before we cut." Mr. Speaker, I'm happy to update honorable members and the public that despite COVID-19, the planning and redevelopment work to phase out middle schools and introduce signature schools within a 2-tier education system is continuing. Since my last update in March, a prototype for the future of the Bermuda public school system has been developed. Some will be familiar with the use of this term as it reflects the approach undertaken during the development of Plan 2022. This prototype will be built upon and fine-tuned with further collaboration and engagement with stakeholders who will deliver on our new education system and the constituents who will be its beneficiaries. Using design thinking and prototypes allows us to design and test the proposals, improve upon them, and test them again to produce changes that meet the promises of the government and the current and future needs for our community. Mr. Speaker, the first prototype has been shared with critical stakeholders over the last 2 months. Their feedback has been invaluable and has been used as a resource as the prototype evolves. The prototype being used for the next stages of the plan development. During these last 2 months, we presented the prototype to the Cabinet, the PLP caucus, the opposition, the Board of Education, the Department of Education staff, preschool administrators and principals, preschool, primary, middle, and senior school teaching staff, executive members of PTAs for primary, middle, senior schools, and our special school, Dame Marjorie Dean Hope Academy, executive boards of the DUT, DPSU, and the BIU, executive members of boards for all aided schools and the Bermuda Educators Council. Mr. Speaker, presentations are also planned for school custodians and administrative assistants, a cross-section of students, parents, and other members of our community. Mr. Speaker, this prototype is a result of 2 years of engagement, collaboration, and data collection, as well as study of best international practices for improving the quality and delivery of education for all. We have a vision that sees changes to the education structure with the removal of middle school, the introduction of signature schools, and the absolute movement to new ways of teaching to better match the ways in which our children can and do learn. Mr. Speaker, this prototype begins with the end in mind, meaning that the elements of the prototype are consistently guided by the kinds of graduates the public school system will develop, along with parents, peers, mentors, and community partners. To achieve this, the continued prototype work will look specifically at a 2-tier education framework which removes middle school and introduces signature school, a 2-tier education system designed to increase education options for all students, including tailored education and support for young people with special, additional, or alternative education needs. More and more students who would have attended middle school will at younger ages have access to City and Guilds and NCCAR certification, expanded dual enrollment with the senior schools, and employability skills. This is being developed to expose our students to a broader variety of potential life interests at an earlier age. Mr. Speaker, signature schools who are on the pathway to preparing for post-signature school students who are on the pathway to prepare for post-secondary education, training, the world of work, and community life. Will participate in cooperative education, workplace, apprenticeships, internships, dual enrollment at the Bermuda College, NCCER and CDN Guild certification, signature certifications, leadership and employability skills, music examinations, and other certifications. This is not only to prepare students for post-secondary education, training, and employment, but to help our students to grow into the world as thinkers, creators, entrepreneurs, and citizens who will lead and further develop the Bermudian society. Mr. Speaker, the curricula is being re-examined to develop more internationally recognized curricula options. Young people deserve more diverse and flexible options for learning anywhere and at any time. The prototype also calls for enhanced educator qualifications as we look not only to transform the structure of the system, but our approach to the profession of teaching and methods of teacher practice. Educators entering the system will be expected to possess or obtain qualifications, experiences, and competencies that meet international standards. Certifications, DEC license, pass a locally created version of the praxis exam. International certifications that will be recertified every 5 years. ICT certification, leadership development, a 21st century evaluation system to evaluate our teachers. Professional courses separate from professional development required every 2 years. SCARS, TCI, MTS, and restorative circles trained and be fit to work with children. Embedded within the teaching profession is a commitment to growth and lifelong learning. Therefore, the Department of Education and the Bermuda Educators Council will work with educators to develop pathways for improved professional learning during the transformation process. Mr. Speaker, our system also requires modern, fit-for-purpose facilities to support the new education structure and the delivery of modern curricula and high-quality teaching. Therefore, much of the prototype work will look at what facilities are required to support 21st century and real-world and authentic learning experiences for students in all of our schools. Our prototype details the removal of middle schools, the remaking and design of our current system. However, this work cannot be done by the Department of Education and our consultant innovation unit alone. The prototype calls for the development and recruitment of school redesign teams. The persons who will serve on these teams will be predominantly teachers and leaders within the public school system and will engage parents, students, businesses, cultural and community organizations, other learning institutions, and relevant government departments. Mr. Speaker, additionally, the ministry and the Department of Education will collaborate with and support school design teams to test the feasibility and viability of the new models of teaching and learning, along with the assessment practices for schools that will form the new two-tier structure. They will also develop and implement the workforce and technology strategies that best support and enable the redesigned schools and redesigned systems. Mr. Speaker, Plan 2022 Adaptive Strategy 5.1 calls for us to, and I quote, develop a governance structure that both holds the Department of Education accountable to citizens through a board of education and that provides the department greater autonomy for fiscal, human, and operational decisions. Some will read into this as a call for an education authority as detailed by Bermuda First. This idea is very much still being considered, and the discussions with Bermuda First are still ongoing. However, the current governance structure will be evaluated. The best structure for our system will be determined and presented in due course. Mr. Speaker, I've repeatedly referred to a prototype when referring to the future of the Bermuda public school system. I've also stated that we recognize the need for collaboration and consultation to ensure that we have a system that the Bermuda public have asked for through Plan 2022. In the coming months, we will begin more extensive consultation to gather the public's feedback. When we have a prototype, as we do, that talks about the reduction or consolidation of schools, repurposing of schools, and realigning the system, and consultation. Consultation is required, and consultation will happen. However, rest assured, the phasing out of middle schools is a promise that the Bermuda government views as an absolute and will deliver on. Mr. Speaker, we will make sweeping changes on how we educate our children. We will phase out the middle schools and introduce signature schools that will have curricula to support professions required by the Bermudian workforce, including the trades and entrepreneurs needed in Bermuda and beyond, now and in the future, including what is needed for those students with special needs. Mr. Speaker, we will transform our current system from a 3-tier to a 2-tier system that's based on best practices and genuine input from the Bermuda community. Our goal is to provide our children with the structure, resources, and support to enable them to participate in, profit from, and lead the 21st century economy of Bermuda. Mr. Speaker, I ask honorable members and Bermuda as a whole to join us as we transform the Bermuda public school system. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. We now have the final statement this morning from the Minister, Cabinet Office. Minister, would you like to put your statement?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Office of Project Management and Procurement, OPMP, was established in 2011 to regulate all procurement of goods and services and workers in the public sector. However, the Code of Practice for Project Management and Procurement was not introduced until July 2nd, 2018. Mr. Speaker, the government recognizes that public procurement policy must be both robust and flexible in order to systematically and practically address the changing economic needs of Bermuda. Mr. Speaker, the changes to the code have elevated our procurement processes in line with international best practices and standards. Public bodies now have more flexibility in choosing procurement methods that will help achieve greater business value while also mitigating potential contractual risks. Mr. Speaker, the latest version of the code, which Cabinet recently approved and came into effect on July 1st, 2020, allows public officers to be creative and flexible in their approach to procurement. Understanding and adaptation of the code is key to promoting consistency and a standard approach across the public sector, thereby reducing inefficiencies often associated with regulatory matters. Mr. Speaker, in summary, the changes to the code are as follows. The code was amended to include 2 additional categories to which the code does not apply. However, they do require approvals from the appropriate accounting officer or the financial secretary. They are media, communication, and public relations companies with the approval of the accounting officer, and accounting and auditing firms for specific services with the approval of the financial secretary. A new procurement review committee has been established to review all unsolicited proposals. This committee is created to assist with the assessment and evaluation of USPs that are submitted to various government ministries. The committee will consist of the financial secretary, permanent secretary responsible for OPMP, and the director of OPMP. The procurement thresholds and approval of contracts values have been amended. Procurement thresholds have 3 levels and procurement methods apply. Under $10,000, $10,000 to $49,999, and $50,000 to $99,999. These changes are covered under Section 11 of the Code. The intermediate value procurement threshold has increased to values of $100,000 to $249,999. The high value procurement threshold has increased to about $250,000 and is covered under Section 13 of the Code. The single source procurement Section 24 of this Code has been amended as follows. Public officers no longer have to obtain prior approval from the director of OPMP. However, Mr. Speaker, public officers must inform the director of OPMP of their single source procurement. The director of OPMP may conduct an inquiry to determine justification and process steps. The director shall report quarterly to Cabinet in matters of compliance. Mr. Speaker, the steps that were taken improve efficiencies within the system, but do not go far enough to ensure economic growth and prosperity within small businesses, gender, race, and disability ownership. Mr. Speaker, to ensure that the government's aim is being met, there has to be a way of measuring success based on government's aim. Mr. Speaker, members may not be aware, but in Bermuda, a small business is defined under the Bermuda Economic Development Corporation Act, which states small business means a Bermudan-owned and owner-operated business enterprise with gross annual sales of less than $1 million or an annual payroll of less than $500,000. As a result of that definition and due to technical work at the Accounting General, office to identify and label vendors, I can report the government's success in rewarding contracts to small businesses. Mr. Speaker, since 2017, the government has awarded more than $38 million in contracts in small businesses. In 2017-2018 financial year, $13 million. In financial year 2018-2019, $13 million. And financial year 2019 to 2020, $12 million. 3 years prior, Mr. Speaker, only $33 million was paid to small businesses. Financial year 2014-15, $12 million. Financial year 2015-16, $11 million. Financial year 2016-2017, $10 million. Mr. Speaker, for the first time, a government is able to identify and measure the value of what it pays to small businesses. But Mr. Speaker, this does not go far enough. Government's vision to use its purchasing power to promote equality of opportunity with regard to disability, gender, and race is being fully met, must be fully met. Mr. Speaker, for decades, business owners who joined the right golf club, went to the right private school, or knew the right people would always been government contracts. Having been awarded a contract once, it will subsequently get more contracts, partly by doing good work and partly by playing the game to get another contract. Some businesses being more successful than others is normal, as we choose to live in a capitalist society, but not if that success is earned by unfair practices. Mr. Speaker, this government is not going to rest on its laurels and pat itself on the back. We are pushing for further diversity. Our aim is to replicate the success of awarding contracts to small businesses, and we intend to use government's purchasing power to promote equality of opportunity with regard to disability, gender, and race. Mr. Speaker, we will seek to utilize the public purse to create opportunities for business owners who are marginalized in the past, particularly Black-owned small businesses, as well as other deemed unsuitable by past governments. If we generally want to diversify our economy and economically empower those Bermudans who up until now have not had a piece of economic pie, we must take steps to make this happen. Mr. Speaker, to make this happen, we are working on identifying, as we did for small businesses, all those companies that are doing business with government as far as disability, gender, or race, in regards to at least 51% ownership within that group. Once this is determined, then based on government's approved matrix system, these companies will score a higher grade, hence having the opportunity to receive more contracts from government. Mr. Speaker, we have learned that the impact of the government's purse is so strong that maintaining the status quo is not good enough. Talking is not good enough. Action must be taken, and action will be taken. Mr. Speaker, it is vital that business owners know that government is open for businesses, because it is, and we are. Thanks, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. As indicated just now, I am going to ask the House for leniency to allow the Minister of Education to amend to the appropriate amendment to the paper that was introduced earlier this morning on his behalf. Minister, the House asking for the House to yield and suspend the rules for us today. Is that all right?
Yes, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Minister?
Mr. Speaker, do you want me to ask for the suspension or already?
We just requested and it was fine. Continue.
Mr. Speaker, I have the honor to attach and submit for the information of Honorable House of Assembly the Bermuda College audited financial statement for the years 2018-2019. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. And that'll amend what was done earlier this morning. Amendment for the clarity of members. We'll now proceed. Having had all the statements read, there are reports of committees. There are none. Question period. This morning there are no written questions, but there are questions from the statements that were given this morning. We have
Thank you and good morning, Mr. Speaker. I have one question. On page 3, the Premier, Minister of Tourism, he, and I quote, said, people won't leave New York for restaurant weeks in Bermuda. I'd like to know what research or evidence does the Premier or the BTA have that people in New York will leave home to come to Bermuda for film, fashion, or art?
Remember, I should have stated that we started questions at 12:23. We've got 60 minutes. Premier?
Mr. Speaker, I thank the honorable member for her question, but I think that she has missed the point of the statement. And the point of the statement was not necessarily of the events. The statement is how events are marketed in order to increase relevance. And what I specifically said is the use of branding with international celebrities and to attract private sector investment to make the events more marketable so people would want to attend. And I think that's what other jurisdictions are doing, and I think that is something that we need to align ourselves with.
Thank you. Is there a supplementary?
The questions. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Okay, thank you. That moves us on from that particular statement. The next statement that members have questions for is the statement from the Minister of Transport regarding the airport project. And Mr. Minister,
You acknowledged the questions that I had. I said I had questions, and you acknowledged it for the Premier.
oh, Opposition Leader, I'm so sorry. I see a jump there. My apology. Opposition Leader, Premier, sorry, the Opposition Leader does have a question for you as well.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On the second page, the very first paragraph, the Premier mentions that the BTA as an organization is top-heavy and does not yet embrace the ethos of this government. I was wondering if the Premier could then expound on how the BTA is top-heavy and how it has not embraced the ethos of this government.
Premier?
Mr. Speaker, I thought that it was evident in the statements of which I had made when I said the issue of making sure that they are the ethos of the government. And I think if I may quote from my statement, where I said, and I quote again, does not yet embrace the ethos of this government. That is to say, the creation of an equitable redistribution of opportunity so that those who have been left out or left behind by Bermuda's successes, predominantly Black entrepreneurs, will receive a chance to participate on equal terms, end quote. I think that is relatively self-explanatory, Mr. Speaker, but I can just give an example if the Honorable Opposition Leader would like me to do so. We can talk about the Bermuda Tourism Authority sponsored visitor center on Front Street, a project which went 3 times over budget, something that if other persons would have known that, they would have actually said something. And then a tender that goes to the top, which, Mr. Speaker, with all respect for the proprietors who earned that bid, do not represent the ethos of this government to give a fair shake to entrepreneurs in this country that are Black and who have been left behind. So I think that that is a key indication of the direction. And as I say, they have not embraced the ethos of this government, Mr. Speaker, because if the Tourism Authority is going to continue to give to persons who have, without recognizing that we need to broaden the level of participation in the economy, it is not recognizing the ethos of this government. And it's probably reflecting the ethos of the government who set it up and appointed the persons on the board who had perpetual succession, which is why we changed the law to enable the government to put appointees on the board. On the next question, Mr. Speaker, which the Honorable Opposition Leader asked about top-heavy, we have an organization that has a very large C-suite, which should be dedicated to sales and marketing. In my view, there could be some trimming of that top executive level so that more money and funds can be devoted to marketing the jurisdiction and also product development.
Supplemental?
Yes, supplemental?
Yes. Considering then when the Premier says, he says predominantly Black entrepreneurs as this being part of the ethos of the government, I'm just curious as to what evidence did he find of this that was not taking place, that Black entrepreneurs were not being included? Because I'm sure that would be disturbing to all of us if that was the case.
Mr. Speaker, I will repeat what I had just said. We could have to go no further than a visitor center, which was massively over budget on Front Street, and the awarding of a contract of a restaurant at the top of that visitor center, and the basis of whom the contract was awarded to. I take no issue with the people who run it. What I do is take issue with the ethos of a board and the tourism authority that doesn't recognize that this government wants to broaden economic opportunity so persons who have not had an opportunity can have an opportunity.
Supplementary, a new question?
Supplementary to that.
Second supplementary, yes?
Yes. The Premier also in that same question mentioned that when we talked about being top heavy, in his opinion, he said, I mean, there are many people who believe that in their opinion that cabinet is top heavy right now. So I guess what I'm asking is, can we foresee then cuts being made to this, what he calls a top heavy BTA?
Mr. Speaker, the internal functions, hiring, and organization of the Bermuda Tourism Authority is not a matter for the minister. That is a matter for the board. What I can say, Mr. Speaker, is that the appointments of which will be made to the board will be in line with the government's view that we need a more streamlined organization that can devote funds to product development and marketing and relevance, and less funds to salaries, Mr. Speaker. It comes as no surprise, and I said it when I was swearing in persons or attending the swearing in of persons of the government house. Here we have, persons who run this country who are making half as much as persons in the C-suite of the Bermuda Tourism Authority. We can just speak to, sales and marketing officers and all the rest who are being paid twice as much as persons here. And people will wonder whether or not the government and the country is getting value for money. So I think in all cases and instances, when we're talking about how do we make sure that we are delivering value for money, we must examine what we have, find out what is the best way to allocate limited resources in the most productive manner possible, and go ahead and execute. And I have no doubt that the new persons appointed to the board will reflect the ethos of the government and will recognize that we need to have a paradigm shift to increase the relevance of the jurisdiction, and I'm certain that those persons will make that clear.
Thank you. The new question?
No question. Thank you, Premier. Over on page 3 at the very bottom where the Premier outlines bullet points and he says air service development. He mentions that there is now a joined up approach to air service development that will form the foundation of critical next steps. Can he explain what he means by joined up approach, what this is involving?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The joined up approach recognizes that there are, unfortunately, many different aspects to air service development that due to the decisions of the former government. So the government does not have control over the airport in its entirety. Therefore, we have to work with Skyport. There's been many discussions about the fact that Skyport, when the former government was in office, when the former Minister of Finance said that Skyport will be responsible for minimum revenue guarantees, and now we realize that Skyport says that that's something that has to fall to the government of Bermuda. So between the Tourism Authority, the Ministry of Tourism, and also with the Airport Authority and Skyport. So it's a joined up approach, and that is what we have to have due to the fact that because of the changes that were made by the former government, there were issues where Skyport, EAA, government, and what's it called. So now we all are working to make sure that we're on the same page, and that is the approach which we've now taken.
Supplemental.
Supplementary, yes.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Is the Premier then suggesting that these 3 entities he's just named were not working together before on joint initiatives?
Mr. Speaker, the airport authority and the Skyport were formed in, I would say, April of 2017, about 3 months before the former government lost the election. So when we came into office, we had to make sure that all of these entities worked together because it's brand new. And that's just a fact. So they were new entities, and we needed to make sure that we figured out how they could work together on air service development. Again, there were representations made in this House of Assembly, Mr. Speaker, by the former government of which the opposition leader was a member, that the Skyport would be responsible for minimum revenue guarantees. When we came into office, Skyport says, no, government, that's on you. So 16% return paid to a company, which today the Minister of Transport said that, hey, look, we've got to pay more money for a contract that the former government made. We were sold a bag of goods saying Skyport would be responsible for MRGs, and now the government wants. So yes, we have to get everyone on the same page, Mr. Speaker. So the opposition leader has asked the question, and the answer is no, they were not working together, and it was our job when coming into government to make sure that they did.
Thank you. Further supplementary or new question?
Supplementary. So is the Premier then saying,
Supplementary, yes.
after 3 years now, we are finally getting to the point of working together? After 3 years. He's making a statement that they're now going to move towards these entities working together. It's taken 3 years?
Mr. Speaker, I would say that we are now at a place where we can work together. We are now at a place where there has been I think that the former Minister of Tourism and Transport had announced that there was an air service development plan, which was part of the BTA, the Bermuda Airport Authority, the Ministry of Tourism and Transport, and Skyport, understanding and making sure they had a joint approach. For example, Skyport wanted to have airlines coming from Ireland. The Bermuda Tourism Authority felt that maybe they didn't need airlines coming from Ireland. You understand? So this is the problem, Mr. Speaker. When you set up, as the former government did, independent entities which are not directly responsible to the government of Bermuda. So this is the reason why we are working to make sure that everyone is on the same page.
Thank you. Any further?
Fourth question.
Yes. Further question? You used your 2 supplementaries. This is your 3rd question.
Yes. Thank the Premier for his swift work. The 3rd question then is, I read with interest on page 4, where he mentions striking out into film, art, fashion, and entertainment, and then continues on, every day we are treated to success stories of local news about Bermudians who have achieved name recognition and success. Now, I do recognize that this whole paragraph, I have seen this stated before, and I agree with the last part where it says natural beauty is not enough to get us by in 2020. So clearly said and agreed. But the ethos of this paragraph, as we would, as the Premier has mentioned, ethos, really is talking about how we can have something established here. And I believe in February of 2018, we established a new international entertainment hub that was supposed to outline and did outline the very initiatives that I see here. What happened to that new international entertainment hub back in 2018 that had been started in February under this government?
Mr. Speaker, I'm not entirely certain what new international entertainment hub the honourable member is referring to.
Thank you. Well, Mr. Speaker, if I can go from the Royal Gazette.
Would you like to provide some clarity on that number in your question?
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. In the Royal Gazette, published February 16, 2018, a new international entertainment hub is to be created at Cross Island and Moresby House in the West End. Lieutenant Colonel David Parish, the Public Works Minister, said the Savvy Entertainment Bermuda had taken over management of the former America's Cup home. So the Premier is very familiar with this. It's a big splash in the Royal Gazette. There's at least 15 people in a picture, including ministers and others who are working on this, and even the former Premier Jennifer Smith, I believe, is there as well. I'm just looking at a picture here. We're trying to find out, based on this paragraph, it outlines basically the exact same thing. So what happened to that hub?
Mr. Speaker, what I can say is that it does not outline the exact same thing. So I'm happy that the opposition leader will give me an opportunity to speak, because that, in its essence, is part of the challenge, Mr. Speaker. The thing is that in a modern era of tourism marketing, what is necessary is that you bring relevance to a jurisdiction. And in order for you to have relevance to a jurisdiction, you have to make sure, as was stated inside of my statement, that you have to blend celebrity, you have to blend relevance, you have to use the effort with celebrities in order to make sure that you can use the brand and private sector sponsors as well to build their brand, to make it something where people want to attend. Do I think that an entertainment hub can form a part of that? Absolutely. Do I believe that there is more that is going to be needed in order to make that work? Absolutely. And so from the perspective which I said, Mr. Speaker, I can just give an example. In my statement, I spoke about making sure that we have real film festivals that represent what we have here in Bermuda. I know that there is a Bermudian overseas who won awards for what she did in an acclaimed movie this year, Queen and Slim, but yet had to struggle to try to get recognition for that inside of Bermuda's own film festival. So we need to do a better job of recognizing what we have and developing what we have, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, I have a supplementary.
Supplementary, take the supplementary from the member.
Yes. So what research, what evidence does the government have that this kind of entertainment is going to be something that's viable here in Bermuda? We know that in the marketing field, it's very high risk to use testimonials from celebrities. So I'm just curious, what evidence do you have that this would even be something that would be viable?
Mr. Speaker, I'm trying my best to not be amused by the questions. The evidence of which I would give and submit to the Honorable Opposition Whip is look at what our competitors are doing, look at what we're not doing, look at our competitors' air rivals going up, and look at ours standing steady. Look at us turning into a cruise destination, and look at other places that are actually using modern techniques in marketing. Mr. Speaker, let me just lay it out on the table. The Bermuda Tourism Authority, after 5 years of being established, still doesn't even have verified social media accounts. We can do better.
Any further questions? Supplementary?
Mr. Speaker, I have a supplementary.
Supplementary, yes.
So yes, Mr. Speaker, just asking, following on with the entertainment, Bermuda has had several music festivals over the last 10, 15 years. Do we have information, data from what happened when we had lots of stars coming to Bermuda, whether that actually had any impact on our tourism?
Mr. Speaker, I'm not going to speak to that in its specifics. What I'm going to speak to, comparing something in 2008 and comparing something in 2020, is to realize that marketing in 2008 and 2020 are completely different. There was no Instagram in 2008. It is a different time, and I appreciate that honorable members of the opposition want to poke, but what I want to say is that we must recognize that as a country collectively we can do better. This is part of the problem. Part of the problem is that we are too slow to move and to recognize that the investments in which you have to make, tied in with the development, tied in with relevance, is what is necessary. What we end up getting ourselves into is discussions and arguments over short-term views, short-term returns, versus long-term plans and long-term visions. The Bermuda Tourism Authority has laid out a national tourism plan, which was blessed by this government. There are challenges inside of that plan, which we have to make sure that are dealt with. We are not doing a good enough job delivering on the things which have been laid out. Bermuda is turning into a cruise destination. That will not provide the jobs of which we need for the people inside of this country. So we have to do things differently. It's no wonder that, the former director of tourism that was fired by the former government goes off to another jurisdiction and delivers record numbers, because they understand that you have to market differently. That's all I'm saying, Mr. Speaker. And I'm certain that honorable members of the opposition would support that.
I have a
Supplementary,
Mr. Speaker.
Supplementary?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. I just have a question when the Premier is indicating.
We hear you, but we don't see you, honorable member.
Sorry, I did start my video. I don't know what's happened here. Can you see me now? I didn't know what's happened.
Yes.
Okay, it's there. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Premier has indicated that the tourism plan had some deficiencies in it, and now he sees a new light. Is the Premier suggesting that the work that's been done over the last 3 years by the former ministers of tourism under his administration have failed?
Mr. Speaker, I know that the honorable member has the opportunity to read, so I'm just going to refer to my statement where I said I'm determined to build on the work done by ministers of this government to see more Bermudians working in tourism. So I can speak to the successes of Minister Jamal Simmons and the work to get more Bermudians inside of the tourism field inside Bermuda, which was without question a success. I can speak to the work of Minister Zane Da Silva, requiring the Bermuda Tourism Authority to make sure that they're more accountable. And I'm continuing on that vein. So no, I reject the honorable member's question. I understand that she wants to make issue, but the fact is that we have to demand accountability for our money, and we are going to continue to demand accountability for our money and recognize that just in any business, any government, any relationship, we have to look at where our resources are allocated, whether or not our vision is correct, and how to make sure with limited resources, we can reallocate those resources to make sure that we can best and properly execute on the vision. Recognize, I did not say that there were deficiencies in the National Tourism Plan. That is what the honorable member opposite said. I didn't say that. What I said is that some of the solutions of which are being devised and the actions of which the Tourism Authority is approaching meeting the objectives in the National Tourism Plan are rooted in yesterday and, in my view, bound to fail if we do not switch up how we're doing things.
Second supplementary.
Second supplementary, yes.
Yes, and I thank the Premier for his clarification. And in speaking of getting Bermudians involved in tourism, I think my question was more specifically relating to the output in terms of getting additional visitors here that were not just cruise dependent. So my question is, has there been a failure to ensure that we've had better results? I think the Premier perhaps has answered the question in the response, but I just wanted to clarify that really was my question.
Premier?
I accept the honorable member's clarification.
Supplementary.
Supplementary? Yes. Supplementary?
Yes, Honorable Premier, you said that we need to improve the film festival that we have in Bermuda, and you made reference to a European film festival. I'm assuming you mean the Cannes Film Festival, but you then went on to say you're not going to allocate any more money for this. How does Bermuda develop a Cannes Film Festival if we have no money?
It is unfortunate that the honorable member's limits is only associated with things such as the Cannes Film Festival without recognizing that there are far more relevant film festivals that take place, such as the Berlin Film Festival and others.
Keep going, Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I heard something. I don't know if it was a.
I paused myself to waiting for a clarification. Was there a point being made? Premier, go ahead. Continue on.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The honorable member of the opposition shows his lack of breath when looking at the issues as relate to tourism. So his assumption of a Cannes Film Festival is just, as I said, an incorrect assumption when I was actually referring to the Berlin Film Festival. And in my statement, I did not say that the government would not commit money. What I did say is that we have to look at these things insofar as investments. But the statement of which I made was not in regards to film festivals specifically. It was in the broader level of making sure that when we design events and when we look at how we can utilize these things, of marketing them in a different fashion. The thing is that as a luxury jurisdiction of which Bermuda is, we can't say that we're a luxury jurisdiction when we're offering less than a luxury product. And we have to make sure that we have luxury product all around, Mr. Speaker. That was the essence of what I'm saying. It was an example showing that other places have made these types of investments that make sure that they attract the people of which they need to attract, celebrate the culture which they have, and we can do it. That is all I'm saying. Perfect example, Mr. Speaker. Let me just say this. We are home to one of the biggest brands of rum in the world. You have a rum festival. I'm not speaking what it is. What I'm saying is that the country needs to look at how we approach events differently. I do not believe that we are going to succeed in bringing tourists to Bermuda by having restaurant weeks. That's just it. We need something more. We need something different, and we need something relevant. And that is the charge which I will give to the board of the tourism authority. We must continue to develop and look at how we accomplish the goals that are set out in the Bermuda tourism plan in a different way.
Any further supplementaries?
Yes, supplemental, Mr. Speaker.
It's a supplementary.
I don't think
supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I don't think the Honorable Premier answered the question, which is where the money's going to come from, whether it's Cannes or Berlin. Presumably, he has some evidence of what the Berlin Film Festival would cost to put on, and he's done some research and homework before he makes these statements. How much is that, and where is the money coming from?
Amir?
Mr. Speaker, the honorable member once again shows his lack of depth on these issues. So again, I'll repeat to the honorable member that there is money that is assigned to Bermuda Tourism Authority. The question is, what do we have? How do we make it different? The challenge that we have in Bermuda is that we have not done a very good job in attracting private investment. Sponsorship. How do you do that? You do that in partnering with existing brands that want to promote their brands via celebrity. That is what we have to do. We have to change our approach to make sure things are relevant. So I'm not going to be drawn into the question of how much this will cost and how much that will cost, because the Minister of Tourism does not sit down and allocate investment budgets for the Bermuda Tourism Authority. We set out specific terms and specific objectives and say, this is what we need to meet. That is what former ministers have done. That is what I will do.
Thank you. Any further supplementaries? There are none.
Supplementary, Mr. Speaker.
Supplementary?
Yes, Mr.
Supplementary? Yes.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. The Honorable Premier says that the BTA as an organization is top heavy. What does he intend to do about that?
Mr. Speaker, I believe that the leader of the opposition, instead of the former leader of the opposition, asked the exact same question. And I believe that I had answered the question adequately, Mr. Speaker, and all I would do is I would refer that member to the question, the answer which I gave a moment ago. But Mr. Speaker, if you'd allow me to go back to another question which was asked, where someone was asking where the money would come from, I would say, if we had $200 million that didn't go to Morgan's Point, we might have some money to play with.
Thank you, Mr. Premier.
Supplementary, Mr. Speaker.
Supplementary. Your second supplementary?
Yes, Mr. Speaker. The Honorable Premier says that Bermuda is irrelevant in certain key markets. Which markets is he referring to?
Premier?
I'll just hit on the number one market, Mr. Speaker, New York City.
I have a supplementary, Mr. Speaker.
Member, I think you may have asked two supplementaries already under this one. Was it?
Premier just got onto the different question. Was that a different question?
Well, we've been on to all these supplementaries have come off the last question that the opposition leader asked. Or this third question has led to all these supplementaries. And I believe we asked supplementaries on this third question.
I did ask two supplementaries.
Yes.
That's fine. I accept.
Okay, thank you. Premier, that brings that question to a close. I'll move on to the next statement there for members of questions. And I'll also keep in mind that we'll be breaking at 1 for lunch. So we have 8 minutes until lunch and we can continue the questions when we come back. But the next statement is that for the Minister of Transport in reference to the airport project and MP from constituency 23. Anthony, you have a question.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, on page 4 of the minister's statement, going into page 5, the minister indicated about the necessity for the airport authority to transfer $5,770,995.54. Guaranteed Revenue Reserve account, which is managed by Skyport at BNYC Mellon, and that was done this week. The question that I have, Mr. Speaker, is could that $5.8 million have been paid out of the revenue that was earned from the economic activity that this government generated over the past 3 years? Or had the economic activity been insufficient to cover this responsibility?
Premier?
That was to the Minister of Tourism and Transport.
I'm sorry, Minister of Transport, I'm sorry.
Mr. Speaker, this minimum guarantee is worked out every quarter, so I'm unclear as to the question that the honorable member is asking.
May I clarify?
Do you require her to restate the question?
Yes,
I'd be happy to clarify, Mr.
Could you clarify your question, honorable member?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. The minimum revenue guarantee, which have been worked out every quarter and would have to be paid based on whatever the deficiencies were under the terms of the agreement. In order to pay that, the government would have to get funds from somewhere in order to pay it, not for the quarter, but out of the fund, out of the consolidated fund. My question is, should the government have been able to pay this $5 million when it became due, when the accounting was done at the end of the quarter, out of the economic activity that it would have generated over the course of the last 3 years? Mr. Speaker, I'm going to move on with my question because I know clearly the answer is none, it hasn't. I'm going to ask the second question, Mr. Speaker. The second question is, how much pandemic insurance has the government put in place for contingencies when they closed the airport in March of 2020?
Minister?
I thank the minister, the opposition member for the question. The airport was never closed.
How much contingency?
The airport, Mr. Speaker, the airport has still remained open to traffic.
Mr. Speaker, just as a clarity, and maybe I just misunderstood, but the revenues that come into Skyport would be generated from not just private aircraft, but also commercial aircraft. Commercial aircraft was stopped in March of 2020 or thereabouts, other than the few small flights few in number flights that came in for specific purposes. So my question was, knowing that there was going to be significant revenue shortfall, did the government put in place any pandemic insurance that would have taken account for the contingency that would have arisen as a result of the failure to produce revenues while the airport was closed? That's my question. It's the insurance I'm asking about.
Mr. Speaker, the honorable member's question is a little deep, but let me say that we would have had to have bought that pandemic insurance prior, not buy it afterwards. So we didn't anticipate a pandemic, did we?
Supplementary, Mr. Speaker.
Supplementary, yes.
And plus,
the honorable member indicated that they did not anticipate a pandemic, yet in the Premier's statement yesterday to the public, he said that he couldn't understand why a government in an insurance jurisdiction would fail to provide pandemic insurance. So my question is, 3 years ago when the government came into office, would they not have brought in pandemic insurance, since they expected that way back in 2013 or 14 that the previous government would have had pandemic insurance? That shows the asininity, Mr. Speaker, of the statement. And that was the reason I asked the question. The minister doesn't have to answer. The answer is no, there is no contingency insurance in place. I understand.
You then need to have a running conversation with yourself where you're asking questions and answering questions. If you did wish the minister to answer that, then put the question to the minister. Have you completed your questions, member?
Well, the question for clarity is how much pandemic insurance did the government put in place when the airport went on minimal traffic since March of 2020? Was there any?
Point of order, Mr. Speaker. Point of order.
Point of order.
Yeah, the honourable member needs to withdraw that statement about asininity, Mr. Speaker. I think it's really out of order.
I'm happy to withdraw that, Mr. Speaker. I don't wish to be out of order in any way. I'm happy to withdraw the statement as opposed to asininity. May I say?
Thank you, member.
Duplicity. Thank you, sir.
And the member, thanks for bringing it to my attention because I actually missed it. I would have asked the member to withdraw it myself had I caught it.
And I'm happy to do so, Mr. Speaker.
Okay. Minister, would you like to answer the question?
Mr. Speaker, first of all, let me say that we were told that we would never have to pay this minimum revenue in the first instance anyway. We couldn't have bought pandemic insurance because you can't do it after the fact. I mean, that's the only answer I can give them.
Clarity, Mr. Speaker.
I think you've answered two questions.
No, clarity. The minister's just answered my question, Mr. Speaker. He has not answered the question that I asked, so I do need clarity, please, sir.
You would like clarity on
question one? Yes, please. When the minister said that he couldn't get pandemic insurance after the fact, my question was not in relation to after the fact. My question was in relation to when they came into government. And that is just in keeping with the public statement that was made yesterday. That was why I was asking for clarity.
You're basically asking how come they didn't buy it when they came into government when we didn't know there was going to be a pandemic. I think that's self-explanatory. Almost.
Supplementary, Mr. Speaker. Supplementary.
Supplementary?
Yes, I have a supplementary for the minister.
Yes.
Minister, with regard to the question from the Honourable Member Patlin with regard to the pandemic insurance, do you think that the former OBA government should have made sure that when they struck this deal with the airport that insurance should have been in place?
Honourable Member, thank you for the question, and my answer is a simple yes.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, members. Are there any other questions?
I have another question, Mr. Speaker.
You've had,
and that is in light of the minister.
This is your third question because the others were all supplementary. This is question number 3.
Yes, sir. My third question. In light of the minister's response to his members' question as to whether this insurance ought to have been put in place when the airport agreement was made, my question is, under the insurance, in the insurance industry, exposures and risks are taken into account at varying points in time. Has the government, in examining closely,
can you simplify the question, make it more clear so it's not too long and run on?
I needed to put it in context. Has the government, once they were reviewing the contract, once they came into office, did they then determine that an insurance would have been needed in the event that we had extenuating circumstances that may have challenged the responsibility to make a payment?
Minister? Mr. Speaker, we couldn't have added it at that time. There was no variation required. So, no variation clause. So, in the agreement. So, the honourable member should have understood that.
Supplementary, Mr. Speaker.
Supplementary?
Yes, I'm not talking about a variant of the agreement. I'm asking whether an insurance policy for risk can come ex post facto once a risk has been identified and evaluated. So my question is, has there been any contingent liability insurance that may have been taken out subsequent to the looking into the contract, the 20 binders that the Premier indicated? Was there anything there that would have triggered that there may be a possibility for a contingency payment, for payment to be made on a contingent basis? Was there any insurance that was taken out? That was just a simple question.
Minister?
Mr. Speaker, the answer is no.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. That's perfectly satisfactory.
Thank you. Before we move on to the next
Supplementary, Mr. Speaker.
Supplementary?
Yes, Mr. Speaker.
I would like to
What's your
ask,
supplementary?
yes, I'd like to ask the honorable minister, in his opinion, does he feel the contract benefited the people of Bermuda, or did it benefit the ACON and all those principles listed in the contract to the exclusion of Bermuda?
Minister?
Mr. Speaker, 3 years down the road, I can say that it doesn't appear that that was so.
Thank you. Members, it is going 1 o'clock. I would ask that the Premier rise right now so we could adjourn for lunch. We'll come back at 2 o'clock and complete the last roughly 20 minutes of the question period.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I move that this honorable House to now adjourn until 2 o'clock for lunch.
Members, the House stands adjourned now until 2 o'clock, at which time we'll come back and conclude the question period. The House is now adjourned. You can mute your mics and